many mailboxes per block I take down.
Well, Bob Tussey still holds the record, so.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
Okay, looks like we're still missing Presenjit. And I don't see him in the attendees list either, so.
No, I don't see him either, and don't have any messages from him.
You know, wait a minute or two here. So, since it is sort of important that we have all of us at this meeting. Although we've done it with 4 before, but actually used to regularly do it with 4 because Cecil always took vacation right around New Year's and was never back in time for the first meeting, and came back one time and found that he hadn't been appointed to the committee he wanted to be appointed to, so after that he made sure he was back in time.
Where it's usually the opposite. You usually get appointed to committees when you're not there.
Yeah. Well, this is one where, well, it was actually the first time Richard and I were there, and both Cecil and George wanted to be on transportation and MPO. And George talked Richard and I into supporting him, so, and Cecil wasn't there to make his case. Okay, well. I think I'll do about a half minute more and then go ahead and start. Send off a text, Dave.
Sure. This is Eric, not Presenjit.
Yep, just me.
Well, this is almost 5 after, so I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the organizational meeting of the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors for Monday, January 4th, 2021. We'll start, I'll ask Dave to go through the normal procedures for a virtual meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to everybody for joining us this evening. This is, as Mr. Miller just indicated, the January 4th reorganizational and regular meetings of the Board of Supervisors. This meeting's been advertised as a virtual meeting in accordance with the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act using the Zoom telemeeting platform. In addition, the Township's conference bridge has been made available. If you cannot participate in the webinar format, you can access that by dialing the Township's main line at 814-238-4651 and then entering extension 3799 when prompted. If you are here tonight as a member of the public or as an agent to speak on behalf of an agenda item, if you could please enter your name, municipality of residence, and if applicable, a topic you wish to speak on by using the chat feature below the word bubble at the bottom of your screen. Prior to commencing the meeting, just a couple process items to review. First, the meeting has again been structured as a webinar format, which means that attendees won't be permitted to speak unless acknowledged by the chairperson and enabled by the host. I'll provide instructions on how the public can engage and speak on any agenda item at the appropriate time. Secondly, board members are asked to indicate their name when either motioning or seconding a motion so that the minutes can accurately reflect the action taken. And then lastly, I will take a roll call of the Board of Supervisors to ensure that we have a quorum and that all members can hear and interact using the telemeeting platform. Please indicate you're here when your name is called. Ms. Danini?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Mitra? Ms. Stevens?
Here.
Ms. Strickland?
Here.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we start, I'll just say that we're not taking comments from the public on matters not on the agenda at this meeting because we will be taking them at the regular meeting immediately following the organizational meeting. I also need to enter to the record that we had executive sessions meetings on December 17th and December 22nd, both of which related to personnel matters. Then the first item of business is the election of officers. Our procedure for that is that I designate the township manager as acting temporary chair, or does the board do that?
Typically, it'd be a motion that the board would make and approve to designate the
Make
manager.
a motion to designate the manager as temporary chair in order to conduct nominations for the chair and the election of the chair. So I would take a motion to designate Dave as the temporary chair.
I, Laura, will move that we designate Dave as the temporary chair.
I second it, Patty.
Okay. Have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. So Dave, you're the chair.
Thank you. I will accept nominations for the officer seat of chairperson. Does anybody have a nomination?
I would nominate Laura Danini.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Okay, hearing none, I'll close the nominations. I will do a roll call vote for the nomination of Ms. Danini as the chairwoman for the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors. Ms. Danini?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Strickland?
Yes.
All right, I will turn it over to you. Congratulations, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. I look forward to all our challenges and opportunities this year. With that, I would like to take a nomination for vice chair, please.
I would nominate Lisa Strickland as vice chair.
Great. Any other nominations? Okay, thank you. I'll close the nominations and I believe ask Dave to take a roll call vote.
Ms. Danini?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Strickland?
Yes. Thank you. And next, I'll take a nomination to appoint Dave Prabulka. I guess I'll take a motion to appoint Dave Prabulka as secretary or treasurer.
So moved.
Thanks, Patty. And a second?
This is Lisa. I'll second.
Thank you. And I believe then that's just a voice vote.
Sure, yeah,
Okay.
you do it. Just voice vote is fine.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you very much. Next, we'll move on to our annual appointments. Dave, do I bounce this over to you then for an introduction or?
Sure, I can introduce it. So these are annual appointments, meaning they expire at the end of the calendar year. There's a number of positions that are listed in the agenda that are up for appointment. The board this year conducted or issued a request for qualifications and conducted a search for the solicitor position. So I don't have any recommendation in there for that particular vacancy, but the remainder of the vacancies there are manager recommendations that are listed with the agenda. The board can either elect to appoint them individually or to appoint the entire slate, less the position of solicitor if you want to take that as a separate action.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think what I will do is take a nomination for the slate of candidates that the manager has recommended.
This is Patty. I move that we accept this slate of candidates that the manager has recommended.
Okay, great. Do we have any other nominations? Okay, with that, I'll close the nominations, and I believe this is also a roll call vote, Dave?
Typically, so if they're individual, the board can request roll call votes, but typically for the appointments, they've been done as a voice vote.
Okay, great. Let's do that. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great. Thank you. And then I will take a nomination for solicitor.
I would move that we appoint Betsy Dupuy as the solicitor for 2021.
Okay, do I have any other nominations? Okay, I'll close the nominations. And Dave, is this a roll call vote?
You may, if you'd like to request
Let's do a roll call.
Sure.
Thanks.
Ms. Denini,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Mitra,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Strickland.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to our appointments to our authorities, boards, and commissions. Dave, if you'd like to introduce this.
Sure. So depending on the year, the township has a number of authorities, boards, and commissions that residents volunteer to serve on. And this year, there's a table that's provided with the agenda that itemizes each of those vacancies, where which authority, board, or commission they're occurring on, the applicants that have either requested reappointment in the case of those whose terms have expired and they're seeking reappointment, or if there are other candidates for a vacancy, they're also summarized in the table. So, typically the board would go through these one at a time. They're not roll calls, they're just consensus votes or voice votes. But if you wanted to take those one at a time by ABC, you can proceed through each.
Okay, great. Thank you. I guess I will take these one at a time, given kind of we have more candidates and we have vacancies. And so let's take each of these offices one at a time. So could I please have a nomination for our one vacancy on the Planning Commission?
This is Lisa. I'll nominate William Keough.
Thank you. Do I have any other nominations? Okay, we'll close nominations and we'll do a voice vote. All in favor of the nominee, please say yes or aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next, I'll open up the floor for any nominations for any Planning Commission alternates. We may be interested in appointing our other candidate for the Planning Commission for the alternate position.
Yeah, I'd nominate Lou Steinberg as the Planning Commission alternate.
Great. Any other nominations? Okay, I'll close the floor to nominations. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, or nomination carries unanimously. Next, we'll move on to our zoning hearing board, single vacancy. Do we have any nominations for our vacancy on the zoning hearing board?
This is Steve. I would nominate Swami Anastaswaran.
Thank you. Any other nominations? Okay, we'll close the nominations and take a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. And it does look like we have 2 vacancies on our zoning hearing board for our zoning hearing board alternates, but we do not have any candidates at this point. So feel free to recruit for candidates for that. That's ongoing, and so we encourage folks to apply. So we'll move on to our tree commission vacancy. Do we have any nominations for our vacancy for tree commission?
This is Lisa. I'll nominate Mike Jacobson.
Okay. Any other nominations? Okay, nominations are closed. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Next, we have 3 vacancies on our tax review board. I'd like to open up the floor to nominations.
Presenjit, I would like to nominate Matthew Patch and Vicky Hewitt.
Thank you. Any other nominations?
Not that it's really relevant this evening, but I did receive today a cancellation. One of our other representatives on that commission or that board, Christina Whitaker, has moved out of the township, so she's regretfully stepped off. So we still we'll have 2 vacancies even after the other ones are filled.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
So let's recruit for that position as well. I think we're ready for a voice vote, I believe, for, okay, our 2 nominees. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next, the State College Borough Water Authority representative. We have 1 vacancy. I'd like to open the floor to nominations for that.
I'd like to nominate Ford Stryker.
Thank you. Any other nominations? Okay, nominations are closed. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Oh, any opposed? Thank you. Next, we have our CNET representative. We have 1 vacancy on that body. I'd like to open the floor to nominations.
This is Lisa. I'll nominate Thomas Giles.
Any other nominations? Okay, nominations are closed. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Any opposed? And next we have, there is a misprint in the agenda. There's just 1 vacancy for the SCLO Library Board representative. So for that 1 vacancy, I'd like to open the floor to nominations.
This is Lisa. I'll nominate Barbara Ziff.
Are there any other nominations?
I'll nominate Chandra Bose.
Okay. And any other nominations? Okay, nominations are closed. New chair, thinking
So
about the vote for this.
You would, I think historic or past practice anyway, you would take a vote on the first nominee first. If that person gets a majority, then they would be the appointee. Absent a majority and that person, then you move on to the second nomination.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Mhm.
So we will take a voice vote for our first nominee, Barbara Ziff. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Looks like we had a majority for that, Dave.
Yeah, I think if anybody was opposed, if they wanted to speak up, I think I heard
Okay.
5 ayes.
All opposed, any opposed?
No, we're good.
Okay. Thank you. And last but not least, we have our nomination for the University Area Joint Authority representatives. We have 2 vacancies on that body. I'd like to open the floor to nominations.
I'll nominate Steve Miller.
Any other nominations?
I'll nominate Mark Kunkel.
Any more? Okay, we'll close nominations. We have 2 vacancies and we have 2 candidates, so I think I can do this vote with both included. So all in favor of both candidates for both vacancies, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for your help through that. Next, we'll move on to some more appointments to the COG and the regional committees. You'll see on this table, there is 1 blank spot, and that would be for the Climate Action and Sustainability Committee. We do have a chair recommendation and a candidate for that committee now, which is Prasenjit Mitra. So I would like to take a nomination for this as a slate that includes Prasenjit Mitra, if I can, Dave. Okay, great. Would anyone like to nominate this slate?
I would make the nomination of the slate as recommended by the chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other nominations? Okay, let's take a voice vote. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, and thank you very much, Prasenjit, for filling in for our Climate Action and Sustainability Committee, and we'll see how those committees change and morph through our COG restructuring. It'll be exciting.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay, moving on to the appointment to the Police Pension Advisory Board. Dave, if you'd like to introduce this for us.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Police Pension Advisory Board consists of 2 pension members, 2 members from the police department, a member of the Board of Supervisors, and the township manager. That we only meet a couple of times per year with PNC Bank, who's the fiduciary over that retirement fund. Because the Board of Supervisors are trustees of that plan, a representative from the Board of Supervisors has historically been appointed to that board. And in the past, that's been Mr. Miller, at least since he's rejoined the board. I think he's expressed a willingness to continue to serve in that role.
Thank you, Dave. And also, let me just quickly interject an apology to the rest of the board. So I decided to wing it and try to go with nominations that don't require a second, as opposed to motions for appointments that do require a second, just to follow up on Steve's everlasting pursuit to make this meeting as as expeditious as possible. So I'm going to take a nomination for the representative on the Police Pension Advisory Board.
I'll nominate Steve Miller.
Fabulous. Do I hear any other nominations? Okay, I will close the nominations. And can we do a voice vote on this as well, Dave? Okay, I'll take a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. Next, we'll move on to establish our meeting dates for 2021. Dave, would you like to introduce this?
Sure, thank you. So typically the Board of Supervisors meets on the first and third Monday of each month at 7 p.m. Under normal circumstances, we'd be meeting here in person in the main meeting room, but since the pandemic's onset, we've been meeting virtually through the Zoom webinar format. That will continue at least for the foreseeable future until conditions improve. There's an attachment that's included with the organizational agenda that itemizes the specific dates. If the Monday, either the first or third Monday, fall on a holiday or day that the township's closed, we've typically scheduled the board meetings for the following the following day, the Tuesday, the day after. So in 2021, there's a few conflicts where that is occurring. Staff is recommending that the meetings which are normally held on Monday, February 15th, which is President's Day, Monday, July 5th, which actually will be a township office closure in observance of the 4th of July holiday, and Tuesday, September 6th, Monday, September 6th, which is Labor Day. Staff is recommending that they be changed to Tuesday, February 16th, Tuesday, July 6th, and Tuesday, September 7th for those three holidays. Otherwise, throughout the year, it would be the first and third Monday of each month, with the exception of December, where the board meets the first two Mondays of the month.
Thank you, Dave. And that schedule is attached to the agenda. I will take a motion to set our meeting dates.
Steve, I would move the Board of Supervisors establish its regular meeting schedule for 2021 as the first and third Mondays of each month, except they will meet on February 16th, July 6th, and September 7th, and on the first two Mondays in December.
This is Patty, I second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you very much. Moving on to our designation of the depository. Dave, do you want to introduce this for us?
Thank you. Yes, so this is an annual exercise of the board where the board makes an appointment for the township's primary depository, and as well as there's a separate institution that we've typically housed our investments or invested other funds. So the township's investment policy is of course very conservative. We have to make sure that we're protecting our assets. So the finance director typically looks at rates that are offered by various banks for certificates of deposit and other means of investing in a conservative manner the township's funds. This year, we're not recommending any changes. We're recommending that the board appoint Jersey Shore State Bank as our primary depository, and any FDIC insured bank and the Pennsylvania Local Government Insurance Trust for investments per the township's investment policy. And there's some motion language in the agenda too.
Thank you, Dave. And did I hear a correction to that motion? It's the insurance trust for investments, or is it the investment trust for investments?
It is the investment trust. I think I did say insurance.
Okay, lots of I words and yes. Okay, no problem. Okay, so let me please take a motion for the designation of our depository.
So this is Prasenjit. I move that the Board of Supervisors appoint Jersey Shore State Bank as the township's primary depository and any FDIC insured bank, and the Pennsylvania Local Government Investment Trust for investments per the township's investment policy.
Thank you. Could I get a second?
Patty, I second.
Thank you. And all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, moving on to public hearings. Dave, did you want to introduce this?
Sure. So the first is a resolution establishing the agenda order of business for 2021. This is a requirement that the township, that the board enact this through the administrative code. So it's in the agenda. Nothing has changed from the 2020 agenda order of business unless board members would like to make any modifications. Staff's recommending it be approved as presented.
Okay, and this is a public hearing. Do I take then public comment? Okay, any public comment first on our resolution establishing the agenda order of business? And Dave, do you see anybody raised hand?
I don't see any raised hands. If anybody did want to comment on either this or any other public hearings later on in the evening, you can use the raised hand feature, or you can get my attention through the chat and then I can enable you to speak.
Great,
But for
thank
this
you.
item, I don't see any raised hands.
Okay. Then I guess I could take some board discussion if there's any board discussion on this. And a motion.
First you would close the public hearing.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I will close the public hearing on this and take a motion.
I'll move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution establishing the agenda order of business for 2021.
Okay, any second?
I second.
Great. Any discussion? Okay, great. All in favor?
This would
Oh,
be
it's a resolution. I'll take a roll call vote, please. Thank you.
Sure. This is presented as resolution number 2020-1. Ms. Danini,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Mitra,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Strickland.
Yes.
Although I would make a correction, you said 2020-1. It's 2021-1.
Oh,
We've changed.
I don't know. I might have to, we might have to go to the tape. I might throw the challenge flag on that. 2020? We'll let CNET be the arbiter of this. No, I very well might have. I wrote it today a bunch of times.
All right, well, we'll move on to a public hearing on a resolution adopting the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors Procedures Manual.
Thank you. So similarly to the agenda order of business, this is an annual resolution that the board adopts to formally approve the procedures manual that governs how board members and staff interact, how board members interact with the manager, how board members interact with one another, meeting etiquette, et cetera. So what I have in the agenda as the attachment is the same procedures manual that was in place in year 2020. If board members did want to make any changes or modifications to it, you could either do so this evening, or we could, you could elect to table it for further discussion. But what I presented to you is substantively the same as what was in place in 2020.
Thank you, Dave. And it is a public hearing, so I'd like to open that up for public comment.
Let's see.
No hands?
Nope.
Okay, I will close the public hearing and take a motion.
This is Lisa. I'll move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the resolution adopting the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors Procedures Manual.
Thank you. And a second?
Second, this is Steve.
Thank you. And this is a resolution, so it's roll call vote.
This is presented as resolution 2021-2. Ms. Danini,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Mitra,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Strickland.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. It looks like we've reached the end of our first agenda for the evening. So I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. And I guess with Zoom, we just roll right into our next. Okay. All right, so I will then call to order, if everybody's ready, And look, I've got Monday, December 14th up. The Monday, January 4th, 2021 regular meeting of the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors at 7:36 p.m. And Dave did go over everything with the procedures in our previous meeting. I don't know that we need to review that again. If anybody wants to participate, they can raise their hand or notify Dave via chat. So we'll start out with citizens input for items that are not on the agenda.
I don't see any hands raised. If anybody wants to speak at citizens input, you want to use the blue hand in your toolbox to indicate you'd like to say something, or you can use the chat feature.
Okay. If there is no one that would like to comment on anything not on the agenda, we'll move on to our special reports, and we'll go to you, Dave, for your COVID-19 response report.
Thank you and good evening. My report tonight will be brief on any local items or regional items of significance relative to the pandemic response. You can find more detail by visiting the Center Region Ready Facebook page or the COG website at crcog.net. You can also visit the Township's webpage, the Coronavirus tab on the Township's webpage, and the State College Boroughs website, which has been a repository for regional and local information on the response effort as well. Township administration offices remain closed to the general public throughout this week and until further notice. Staff is continuing to work on remote assignments, with some still reporting who are not able to work remotely. Our Dropbox continues to be available. It's checked daily for permit applications, ticket payments, and any other correspondence that may be dropped there. We do remain accessible to the public as needed through virtual meetings, teleconferences, telephone calls, scheduled appointments, etc. The police lobby remains open to the general public for walk-in traffic Monday through Friday during normal hours of operation. Public is still encouraged to schedule appointments or have virtual meetings with police staff where possible. We will be meeting as a crisis management team this week to evaluate whether we can safely return to work in person in the coming weeks, possibly as early as January 11th, but possibly after that as well. I would just advise the public to continue to watch the website, Facebook, email announcements, etc., where we'll be making those notifications in the event that we decide that we can safely reopen to the general public and our administrative side. Countywide, there have been 8,645 confirmed cases and 52,710 negative COVID cases reported on the State College dashboard. There have been 145 deaths in the county attributable to the virus. The 16801 zip code continues to have the largest number of cases in the county. In Pennsylvania, the confirmed number of cases reached just about 595,600. Had 16,361 deaths attributable to the virus. And more information on local conditions and response efforts, again, can be found on both the State College Borough and the Ferguson Township website. Statewide, there were several restrictions that were in place on gathering sizes and indoor dining that were lifted effective today. They were put in place in response to holiday traveling. While lifting these restrictions does allow some activities to commence, such as limited indoor dining, fitness centers and theaters, et cetera, that are permitted to open at a percentage of occupancy. The Department of Health is still encouraging the public to practice COVID safety protocol as numbers continue to increase and to avoid hospitals being overwhelmed throughout the Commonwealth. That's all for my report. I want to thank everyone for your patience as we continue to recover from this crisis, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board or public may have.
Thank you, Dave. Questions for Dave? Okay, I don't see any from the board. Dave, is there anybody in the public that you see there?
Nobody with their hand up?
Okay, and I'm realizing I skipped right on over our approval of the minutes. So I'm going to bounce back up to that and ask for a
Keeping up my
motion to,
tradition here.
what's that?
Keeping up my tradition and
Oh,
skipping
yeah.
over that.
You're in good company.
I'm like, what's that? So I'll take a motion to approve our minutes from our December 7th and our December 14th, 2020 Board of Supervisor regular meetings.
This is Patty. I move that we approve the minutes from December 7th and December 14th of 2020.
Thanks, Patty. Can I get a second?
Prasenjit, second.
Thank you, Prasenjit. Any corrections, changes, discussion? Okay, then all in favor of approving our minutes of December 7th and 14th, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Check. Approved minutes. Okay, and we can move then to our other special report of the evening, which is the Center County Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easements, or PACE, program report.
Thank you. I'm going to bring on Diana Griffith. She's here tonight as the Center County PACE program coordinator. You may remember Diana. She worked for the township as our communications coordinator for a number of years before joining the county staff. Before I do that, just to note for the board's and the public's clarification, this is a agenda item that was requested by a board member to kind of get a little bit more education and evaluate the township's position in the purchase of agricultural conservation easements program. Historically, the townships contributed $150 per acre toward the purchase of conservation easements in Ferguson Township. Diana's provided some resources and some material that are included as attachments with the agenda, but without further ado, I'm going to allow her to speak and I'll just sit in the background.
All right.
Diana, you should be on.
Can everyone hear me?
I can. Mhm.
All right, great. Well, it's nice to see everyone. And thank you, Dave, for inviting us. And thank you, Madam Chair. Congratulations to you and Lisa. It's good to be here. I really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to present on the program this evening. Our board is deeply appreciative of Ferguson Township's support of agricultural conservation easements through the Municipal Partnership Program. Thank you for making us aware of the Ag Conservation Easement Program cut in this year's township budget. We appreciated you reaching out to us early on in your budget discussions to ask about contributing. We make each of our participating municipalities aware of the acreage that we intend to preserve each year and to give you the opportunity to consider contributing to and jointly holding the easements on those farms. We understand why municipalities have had to reduce their budgets as a result of COVID-19. After the pandemic struck, the Commonwealth reduced its ag conservation budget by $5 million and has reduced this year's budget by $5 million as well. Despite the necessary adjustments, which included furloughing staff and postponing some deadlines, state legislators have remained committed to sustaining the program, recognizing its benefits as not only, quote, nice to have, but essential to a healthy food economy for Pennsylvanians. The Wolf administration and Department of Agriculture publicly commended the Bureau of Farmland Preservation staff for their ability to keep the program running as normally as possible despite the pandemic. The county's contribution to the program remains constant at $50,000 in easement. With an eye on maintaining the county's program this year and in the future, I want to briefly talk with you about the program's benefits and how it works in partnership with local municipalities. As Dave noted, as attached to your agenda are supporting materials that I provided for your reference, including the Bureau of Farmland Preservation's 2019 annual report. You'll also find links to the American Farmland Trust report, Farms Under Threat, and a presentation that we made to the Chamber's ABC Essential Series called Stewards of Our Farmland, How We're Securing a Future for Our Farmers. It's essential to note that the Municipal Partnership Program allows the board to leverage municipal dollars to preserve more acres faster. The more clustered farms that we can preserve each year, the better that we are able to protect farmland from encroaching development. Since 1994, beginning with the J. Summers Farm, now owned by June Urban, Ferguson Township has helped preserve 3,746 acres and contributed $150 per acre for a total contribution of $561,900. In 2020, Ferguson Township contributed to the preservation of the Connolly and McWilliams farms. We're also thankful for the contributions of Potter Township and the Half Moon Township Open Space Preservation Program. This year, for example, Potter Township supervisors contributed $5,000 to preserve a farm in Center Hall. Ferguson Township is home to the largest number of farms and the most preserved farms in the county, so it makes sense for the township to continue supporting farmland preservation. It's also a source of pride to work together in support of Pennsylvania's program, which leads the nation in preserving farms. Through the Municipal Partner Program, counties and local municipalities are working together with the Commonwealth to prevent the loss of prime farmland to developers and preserve the best agricultural soils in the state. Ferguson Township's participation in the program sends a message that the farmer's work is essential to your community and that prime farmland is a vital economic and scenic asset that should be protected. I'm happy to take any questions you may have about the program works, and I thank you. We also have Ray Stalinas on the call tonight, as well as Cindy Harding, our new chair of the board.
Thank you, Diana, so much, and welcome, Ray, and hello. Good to see you again. Thank you for the presentation. So I'd like to just first open it up to board members' questions about the presentation, about maybe our questions that we had when we were considering what we wanted to how we wanted to support farmland preservation. And I will say, just definitely for the record, I think that I'll speak for myself when I'm saying I'm very supportive of this program. I'm personally just interested in how the nuts and bolts actually work. So let me open it up to questions from the board for Diana.
Steve, I just wanted to ask, my understanding when we were discussing this, the budget time, was that the $150 is part of the payment that the farmers would receive, but it's not in addition to what they would receive through the rest of the program. Is that the case, sir?
That is, yes, Steve, that's correct. Basically, when the appraisal is done, an offer is made for a total amount per acre that the landowner receives. So if the farm is in Ferguson Township and the township agrees to contribute, that check will be made out separately, and that reduces the amount that the state has to come up with. The county will always be $50,000 per easement. So in the case of the two farms that we're going to be preserving this year, although Ferguson will not be participating, the state will have to make up that portion that Ferguson will not be contributing, which there will be an impact in that there will be less money from the state to preserve farms next year.
Thanks.
Sure.
Others?
May I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Madam Chair? Diana, one of the components of this that, the township, I think, has benefited from to some degree in participating is we become part owners of those conservation easements. Can you talk at all about what that means for the township, to be party to that agreement and to be a part owner of those conservation easements?
Yeah, I think it's an important part of the township's legacy that you jointly hold the conservation easements on these farms, which, signals that you support preserving that farm. And that means that in our stewardship of that farm, we jointly, with the landowner, steward that farm. and make sure that it's not only preserved forever, but well cared for. So I think it's a point of pride that Ferguson Township is putting money toward the program to preserve the farms in your township. Does that answer your question, Dave, or do you want to?
In a way, it does. I think, specifically, maybe more the mechanics of the ownership of the easement. If there were, and I know that this almost never happens if it has, but if there was a removal or sellback of those conservation easements, would the township have a say in whether those easements would be permitted to be released or sold back, I guess, through the rollback tax program and the other approval processes?
Well, the township would, but that would not happen. Once the conservation easement is in place, the farmland is preserved forever. It is protected from development forever. If the landowner should decide to sell the land at some point, the agricultural easement on the recorded deed goes on the new recorded deed. So every subsequent owner has to abide by that easement.
Right, but there is, in theory anyway, which doesn't come to, I don't think it's applied very much, if at all, a means to sell back those conservation easements or to buy back those conservation easements, presumably.
Not that I'm aware of.
Thanks, Dave. Any other questions from the board?
Looks like there's a hand up in the Bill Keogh.
I didn't know if the board wanted to have discussion before turning it over to any public comment.
Yeah, did any other board members have any other questions before I have a few questions before we then open up to the public. Thank you, Patty, though, because watching for those hands, doing all the things is like multitasking craziness. Any other questions, Lisa, Patty, Prasenjit?
No.
Obviously, we can ask other questions after the public too, but do you have anything now?
I didn't. I had Dave's same question, so maybe after the public comment, I might be able to frame up what I'm wondering.
Thanks.
I guess it's the mechanics of that, like Dave said, and any consultation as the years go on in not supervising, but assuring that the program is maintained and that kind of thing. I don't know. I guess I'm just wondering what really does the easement mean in terms of our participation in the program as the years go on.
Would you like me to respond to that now?
Sure, if you feel moved, sure.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the mechanics, I mean, basically the board is entrusted with stewarding those farms that have been approved for easements. And so we do annual inspections to ensure that they're abiding by the terms of the easement, that they're following an approved conservation plan with best management practices, that they are not building anything that they shouldn't be building. And particularly if they would sell the land to a new owner, we are making sure that the agricultural conservation easement language is complete and verbatim as it moves to the new recorded deed. I mean, the township is certainly free to participate in the process. We all, we're basically representing you in this, in our stewardship of these farms, ensuring that because they have accepted this money to preserve their farms, that there are no violations down the road. And we're building a relationship with each farmer so that they know that we're here as a resource for them, depending on what they might need. We've scheduled in-person inspections with them where we meet with them and ask questions about their farms, about their crop operations. Do they plan to build an additional residence? The state has a new subdivision allowance that they're allowed to build one residence in addition to the one that existed at the time of appraisal. So those are some of the questions that we ask, basically about their plans, about their transition planning. But I guess I would say that if the township feels the need to have more of a role, we should talk about what that would look like. It'd be a good topic for discussion.
Thank you, Diana.
You're
Can I just
welcome.
Sorry,
ask one
Lisa.
quick follow-up on that?
Sure.
So with that annual inspection, does the township get that report every year? And is there anything provided to the township annually or in an ongoing way that the township wouldn't receive if we weren't a party to the agreement, if we didn't have that easement?
That is an excellent question, and I think it's a good idea. Right now, we're providing a report to the state, basically confirming that we have inspected those farms. I have done some personal consultation with township officials such as Jeff, the zoning administrator, when there was a farm that seemed to have some issues that weren't necessarily in violation of the easement, but I felt it was important to make Jeff aware. But I think that's an excellent idea. If you would like me to send those reports to you for the farms that you have contributed to, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, just in general, I think that would be great for the board to see and for us to, get maybe annually in an agenda packet to put on the website or something so that, if we participate in that, in those different properties, that residents can see that the program is being maintained and the board stays engaged with that. So thanks, Diana, that answered that question.
You're welcome, and thank you for the suggestion. I really think it's an excellent idea. I think it would help the board to feel more of the ownership that you have, supported.
Thanks. Diana, I think it's more of a clarification than a new question. So just to reflect back to you, do I understand correctly that if Ferguson Township weren't to contribute to the easements, that there would be no loss of dollars to the farmers, that the state, so this is really a program, what am I getting at? So this is really a state program that goes through the county's Agricultural Preservation Board. And so our taxpayers in Ferguson Township, through their state taxes, have funded this program already. And that money that fuels that program at the state level then comes back through the county to preserve farms based on those criteria. Is that, do I understand, I guess, how this works first?
Well, if you look at the materials that I provided for you, it talks about how the state program is funded.
Yeah.
You have the 2% per pack cigarette tax, the Environmental Stewardship Fund, Clean and Green Rollback Taxes, Interest on Pennsylvania Easement Fund, and then you have the county.
Okay.
And there are cases where if we meet the window for the deadline for federal, where federal will reimburse state. If the landowner applies for federal funds, that doesn't mean that they get those additional funds. It means that federal will reimburse the state for that amount. So
our contribution, sorry, just a few questions. Our contribution doesn't offset the county's contribution. It offsets the state's contribution for the easement. And that easement would be granted anyway. We're just offsetting the state's cost. Is that right?
Yes. And I think more importantly, you're making an investment in the farms in your community.
but that investment would be made. But I don't want to hate puppies. I support farmers. I'm on the farmers market steering committee. I'm very pro agricultural zoning. We've done a lot with our zoning to support agriculture. So I don't want it to appear that I don't support agriculture or that I don't want to invest in it, but I do want to be careful about our tax dollars. So if something is being duplicated, I just want to make sure that I understand that we're not, see, I originally thought that money was going straight to farmers. So I was like very supportive in that manner, but it's really going to the state to offset their costs. And so I think that is an important distinction to make for a municipal budget. That said,
Actually, I would correct you on that. It just means that the state has to come up with less money for the farmer. That money does go directly to the farmer. When Dave comes to a closing, he hands that check directly to the landowner.
I guess my point is that landowner would be getting that money regardless as to whether it came out of the Ferguson Township budget or the state budget.
Correct, but it will affect the budget for the following year, which could limit the number of farms that we're able to preserve.
Right, but it'll affect the overall state budget, and that affects 2,000 plus, sorry, I should probably have that number memorized by now. And you know, we are one of them, and it definitely don't want to kind of argue the value of it. I support the value of it, but it's important too that we utilize funding streams as efficiently as we can. So I'll just leave it at that. So I'll open it up to any public comment, and then we can pop back to any other board questions for follow-up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana.
One hand raised in the chat. Bill Keogh, I can bring him on.
Thank you.
All right, Bill, you're on.
Can I be heard now?
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. In addition to Bill Keogh, Ferguson Township resident, for most of you, you aren't aware of the fact because I retired before you came on the board, but I was in fact the chairman of the Center County Ag Land Board for over 20 years. That was an appointment that was made in chairmanship by the county commissioners. They choose the chairman of that board every year, and I had the opportunity to be its chair for over 20 years. I'm really torn about saying anything at all, and I want to at least make this comment. I don't want my silence with regard to this issue and how passionate I am about it to represent the fact that I'm in favor of the action that the board is taking with regard to removing that line item from the budget. I'm silent because my wife's family's farm is one of the farms to be preserved in 2021. Therefore, because that farm is one of the ones to be preserved in 2021, I don't want to get involved to the extent that is a conflict of one type or another with regard to my interest. So I don't want my silence to indicate to any of you that I am in favor from the township perspective of reducing or removing this line item from the budget. I do want to make one other quick question because it's a procedural question. Yes, Mr. Pabolka, there is a procedure by which a farm could have their preserved rights removed. It is a very complicated procedure. It is a very intensive procedure, and it's designed to be that way. The law intends these preservation acts to be in perpetuity forever. But the law also recognizes that there are situations that involve the health and welfare of a community, residents, etc., that may require some action. And so there is a procedure to do that. By the township owning some of the development rights, the township then becomes an actor in that whole rollback decision right from the get-go, because they're one of the holders of the development rights. And I just wanted to clarify that because that is a situation that does occur from time to time, although I don't know of any place in the state so far where that has been acted upon. With that, I will kind of stop talking because I'm concerned about the conflict that I might have in making comments to you all. I'm not on the board anymore, but I am not in favor of removing this contribution from the budget. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. And thanks for the clarification. And I would like to speak to your perception of conflict of interest just momentarily. My understanding is that, well, for a couple of reasons, there's absolutely no conflict of interest. First and foremost, us removing that item from the budget does not result in any way, shape, or form any kind of financial impact to your loved one. They'll still get the exact same amount of preservation dollars. So there's not really a financial interest that's present there. So, but I do really appreciate you bringing that up. I personally don't see that as a conflict of interest, but I do appreciate that. Any other board questions for Diana about just how the program works, the nuts and bolts, anything else like that?
Yeah, so just to understand this correctly, the amount of money allocated to buy farms or to put the easement in Ferguson Township farm in the next year does not depend upon the matches that were done in a previous year. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct. And
Okay.
I wouldn't call it a match. It's simply the contribution that the township is budgeted for.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I do want to respond to Bill's clarification on that point. I understood Dave's question to be if a landowner wanted to reverse the easement. That's what I was responding to. That is, we have been asked by prospective buyers for land that's been preserved. Can we get that canceled? So that's what I was responding to. I am not aware of any case in Center County. There may have been a case or two in Pennsylvania where a violation was so extreme that an easement was removed, but I'm not aware of any in Center County. Bill's point is well taken, but I think I understand Dave's question better now. I thought that in terms of voluntarily removing an easement after you've received the money, no, that does not happen.
May I ask one other question? If there aren't any more?
Sure.
Diana, about 3 or 4 years ago, the previous coordinator approached the township with a request to authorize a letter that is issued year to year that allows the Center County PACE program to use the fund balance that we've accumulated in our Ag Conservation Fund as, I believe I'm representing this correctly, as match dollars for other aid that becomes available. Can you clarify a little bit how you leverage those dollars that are in available fund balance with some of the county funding that may be available to expand the effectiveness of the program? I understand that we don't commit any funding except for Ferguson Township farmland, But I also understand that some of those leveraged match dollars might be used to preserve farms in other parts of the county.
I will have to look into that for you and get you an answer.
Thanks. That would be great. Dave, that's a good point. I had forgotten that we did talk about that as well, and was something that we were interested in. If our contribution becomes a leverage for other county municipalities, and if so, if Potter is the only other township that's participating, can we, get some additional participants into that leveraging program? That might be of greater value, I guess, to the county as a whole than if Ferguson Township is just kind of paying back the state for money that they've spent in our county. Yes, just some thoughts. Okay, any other questions about the Ag PACE program?
I did see another hand go up in the chat if you want. It's
Okay.
Bill Keogh again. I'll bring Bill back on. Bill, you're on.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought that issue up, Dave, that the issue of the township's participation and its influence on the dollars available to the county has a long history. There was a time in our township history when we actually took dollars from our own budget and physically put them into the county's budget, right into the county pot. And that then leveraged greater money, a greater contribution on the part of the state. However, there was concern about that practice because once those dollars from Ferguson went into the county pot, it didn't provide any control on the part of the township with regard to buying easements in other townships within the county. So some of Ferguson Township's money could have theoretically gone to the purchase of easement rights in another part of in another township or municipality. And that was found by the board and by staff and so on to be not acceptable. We didn't want township dollars to be that loose in terms of going out of the township. And so the agreement that David has talked about became a discussion point. How can we have the township's tax dollars that are indicated for this program? How can we have those dollars work in the township's and the county's favor by leveraging greater money from other sources like the state? And the agreement and the letter that was finally adopted as a procedure allowed for the leveraging of greater dollars without transferring the dollars directly to the county general fund and then into the county program. And that has worked quite well, and that has guaranteed that none of the township's tax dollars were being used for purchase of development rights in other municipalities. And that was an important step in the process to ensure that our tax dollars were in fact supporting our Ferguson Township's preservation efforts and not somebody else's. So that leverage is important because that leverage does allow us in the county to accumulate a larger piece of the state allotment into the pot that they use then for purchase of development easements. I think one of the difficulties that Laura, I don't know if it's a difficulty, one of the differences, think of the county's dollars as a pot of money. And that pot of money has multiple sources. If the county pot doesn't get any contributions from Ferguson, the county pot is smaller. It has a limitation with regard to it can only purchase development easements for the amount of money it has available.
From the state, though. I don't want to mean to interrupt you, but this is, I think, sort of a point of trying to clarify the confusion that we have here, because right now we're back again at saying the Ferguson Township contribution somehow relates to the pot of money at the county. But we've heard from Diana that it really relates to something at the state level. I appreciate the history about the deposit of money into the county budget and how maybe that's kind of the policy vestigial tale that Dave is referring to about leveraging those dollars. So I think it is really important for the board to get some follow-up from Diana about county leveraging of municipal dollars to get more funding from the state. That's of interest to us. But still the basic premise here is, and we've come a long way from our budget discussion where we kind of thought like our dollars went straight to the farmer. At this point, our understanding is the Ferguson Township budget money offsets the state budget directly. And it may or may not be used to leverage more money that the state gives the county, but we're not sure about that. Is that?
Am I still on board or not?
Yeah.
I don't think that's the way it is, Laura. That's part of the problem. And I believe that it's going to take more of a discussion than we have time or I have intellect for sitting here in front of a computer screen. This isn't my foray in terms of how to communicate with people. But I do not believe that what you stated is exactly correct.
Fair enough. I'm not I'm not going to object to that. Maybe we could get some follow-up from Diana, and if we have more specific questions.
Well, I think I've stated pretty clearly how it works now. And I'm happy to consult with the state to see if there's more information that I can provide for you, particularly with regard to leveraging. That will be one of my action items. So I've made a list of action items here for follow-up with you. The inspection reports and more information that will help to clarify this.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your time and your patience with all of our questions.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and we're happy to provide you with any additional information or follow-up that you might need.
Thanks a lot. That was a little long for board discussion of a report, but we knew we were going to have some back and forth questions about this. So appreciate everybody's participation in that. So I guess we will now move on to our unfinished business. The first item under unfinished business is a public hearing on an extension of an emergency COVID ordinance of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, requiring the wearing of face coverings and implementing additional regulations to reduce the risk of transmission of the COVID-19 virus. Dave, I will pass it over to you for introduction.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So provided with your agenda this evening is a copy of the ordinance that's been advertised for public hearing. The board may recall that there was an emergency ordinance enacted on September 21st of last year that establishes limitations on gathering sizes, requirements for wearing masking and other protocol in response to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. That ordinance, which is substantially the same as what you've seen enacted in other parts of the county and other municipalities, particularly in the center region, is set to expire on January 31st of this year. So what's presented for the board's consideration this evening is a continuation of that ordinance in its identical form through June 30th of 2021, or at the expiration of the center region and or Pennsylvania Department of Health's emergency declarations, whichever comes sooner. So what I wanted to do is give the board enough time to maybe reflect any changes that you'd like to see in the draft ordinance so that they can be made and re-advertised for January 18th prior to the expiration of this ordinance. Absent that, if you're okay with the language as is and continuing the restrictions as presented, you could just take action tonight to enact the ordinance, which would extend it through June 30th of this year.
Thank you, Dave. And this is a public hearing. So first, I'd like to open it up to the public for comment.
I don't see any hands.
No. Okay, I'll close the public hearing and take a motion from the board, please.
Dave, I will move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the ordinance extending the effective date of the temporary emergency COVID ordinance through June 30th, 2021, or the expiration of the emergency declarations passed by the Center Region Council of Governments and the Pennsylvania Department of Health, whichever is earlier.
This is Patty, I second.
Okay, any discussion on the motion?
I just say, I think if anything has changed since we passed the original, is things are a bit worse now. So it's just as important now as it was then. And I think it is important that we continue this through to the time that the emergency has been declared done. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I support extending this as a base option. The governors, at least to my reading, the governor's health guidance at times has been stricter than the numbers that we have, which is 25 and 50. And one of the options that I wanted to mention would be to take those special numbers out from our ordinance and just peg it to the governor's one. So it would go up or go down along with whatever the state decides. It still gives us the ability to say that we have an ordinance, and if required, our law enforcement folks can use that to perhaps get more compliance and people to obey things. And that way, because we don't have a health department which will go in and figure out these numbers and so on, what makes sense, I was thinking of just piggybacking it with the state numbers.
And I would note to that end, I think Mr. Mitra makes a good point. As in the case with the restrictions that were lifted just today, they were the restrictions on gathering sizes were more restrictive, I guess, than what our ordinance allowed for. And then when they expire, they lift. And I think, to add some, clarification to that point, there is a little bit still of a lack of an understanding of the agencies that are in charge of enforcing some of these provisions, meaning that when the State Department of Health issues these guidelines, if they are more restrictive than our ordinance, and let's say hypothetically, there was an establishment that we found to be allowing more than the state limitations, but less than our ordinance limitations, you'd wind up in a little bit of a limbo in terms of which regulation to enforce. And, I don't know, maybe Chief Albright has something else to add to that, but I mean, typically we haven't really, fortunately, dealt with a lot of enforcement issues But, you know, it is something that I think is a realistic possibility. If the board were interested in tying the limitations to the state numbers, I might suggest that you also set a ceiling, so to speak, because there have been times throughout this pandemic where the Department of Health has said it's up to localities to set what those limitations are. We're not going to be, as the state, adjudicating what your gathering size, indoor, outdoor limitations might be, or maybe they'll set a cap higher than what the board may be comfortable with. So if that's a change that you're suggesting, it certainly is a good suggestion. Maybe something that you might want to tie to the state figures, subject to a limitation of a certain number, presumably what's in the ordinance right now, no greater than.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. I would be in support of that.
Okay, does anybody want to make a motion? Dave, will we just be making a motion to amend the ordinance in that manner and then re-advertise for public hearing?
Yeah, I think if you were to continue the public hearing until, or was, now I have to scratch my head and wonder if I don't recall if the public hearing was closed.
I closed it, yep.
Okay, so then, yeah, we would re-advertise the public hearing with the amendments then for January 18th, which would give the board time to enact the ordinance prior to the expiration of this emergency, the currently in effect emergency ordinance.
Would anybody like to discuss further and or make a motion in that vein?
I would make a motion that we amend the ordinance by stating that in the event that the Department of Health guidelines for meeting sizes is less than what we have in the ordinance, that we would apply those limitations.
Second.
And do we have any discussion on the amendment? Okay, I'm going to call for a vote on the amendment. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the amendment passes. Do we have any other discussion on the ordinance? Anybody would like to amend anything else? Okay, then, Dave, do I take a motion then to reschedule the public hearing to January 18th?
Yes, although I'll look to the outgoing chair and just ask for Mr. Miller's advice on this, because there's a motion on the table that's been seconded to enact the ordinance as recommended. Mr. Miller, I don't know if you just want to withdraw that motion, or should, and then take a motion to reschedule the public hearing, or?
Actually, I'm not sure that we can't just continue the public hearing. I'm not sure that, in the past, what I've done is, even after we've finished public comment, just continued the public hearing to the next meeting, but in which case the motion would still apply with the amendments.
Oh.
But if we consider the other way to do it would be we've voted for the amendment, so we could postpone the original motion indefinitely. Well, I'm not sure what that does to the amendment then. That's the problem.
Could we not schedule a public hearing for the amended ordinance?
Yeah, but first we would have to close out the current motion.
I got you. Okay.
Where's Daniel Forster when you need him,
Yeah, right. I know. I guess my thought is that we could just continue the public hearing to the next meeting and just not close it out. And
And then the meeting on the 18th would begin with the motion
that
as
already
amended
exists
on the
as
floor,
amended.
already on the floor.
Right.
That makes sense.
And then we would take public comment again if there was any, and then proceed. I mean, I don't know if that's completely, strictly in accordance with Robert's rules, but I think it's close enough. So,
Well, as long as it's only a Robert's Rules issue and nothing else, I think we're fine.
Yeah, I would say the important thing is that because it's been substantively amended, that you allow another opportunity for it to be, presented, appear in a paper.
Great.
Any public that may be interested in speaking on behalf of it to come back. As long as you've covered that, I think you're fine.
Yep. So then I'll take a motion, Steve, to
I'll
continue
make a
the public
motion
hearing.
to extend the public hearing on the ordinance until through January 18th.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, previous chair, for your assistance through that. Okay, next item on the agenda is a public hearing on an ordinance of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, amending Chapter 27 zoning, Part 3, Terrace Streetscape, TS District, by amending 27-304.3B3, building height incentives, and amending Chapter 27 zoning, Part 7, supplemental regulations, Section 716, workforce housing, by repealing it and replacing it in its entirety. Dave, either you or Jenna.
I'm just going to turn it right over to Jenna, Planning and Zoning Director.
Great, thank you, Jenna.
Thank you. So in response to workforce housing ordinance amendments, planning staff reviewed the Terrace Streetscape zoning district and the traditional town development zoning district, and is recommending that Chapter 27 zoning, Part 3, 3B3, building height incentives to read if a building is complying with Chapter 27-716 workforce housing, the by right maximum height of 55 feet may be increased to accommodate bonus market rate units not to exceed 75 feet. The workforce housing ordinance is codified under supplemental regulations, Chapter 27 zoning, and applies to zoning districts where the provisions of workforce housing units are required or incentivized. Currently, those two zoning districts are the traditional town development and the Terrace Streetscape zoning districts. Provided with the agenda is the draft amendment to the workforce housing ordinance. This ordinance will be applicable to the following developments within the TTD and the TS zoning districts: 10 or more residential dwelling units, renovation of a residential structure that results in 10 or more additional residential dwelling units within 5 years, and conversion of a non-residential property to a residential property that results in 10 or more residential dwelling units within 5 years. It expands upon the legacy workforce program by allowing for rentals or owner-occupied units, and provides workforce housing units to be built on-site, off-site, and or paid through fee in lieu. The draft has been received and reviewed by all local, regional, and county reviewers. And if the board has any questions on the draft that's included in the agenda, I am more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jenna. This is a public hearing, so I will open it up for public comment first. Oh, I see a blue hand.
Jeremy, I'll bring you on.
Thanks.
Good.
Good evening. It's Jeremy Thompson, a resident of Park Forest. I spoke on this matter back in, I believe it was November when we last spoke about this. Just a couple other things that I wanted to add. Of course, first of all, before I do that, I've been opposed to this ordinance passing in its current form because I don't believe it furthers housing affordability based on the income ranges As a matter of fact, somebody that I served with on the Ferguson Township Planning Commission last month, who also, back in November, who also spoke during the last public hearing, even stated that they wouldn't qualify under this. And unfortunately, their case over the past several years of living in the township is they just haven't ever been able to find an affordable housing program that fits within their income ranges, and they're working 3 jobs to take care of their family and be able to live in the township. Last time I did bring up, there's a lot of occupations within Ferguson Township, many of which encompass even our essential workers from healthcare, retail, food service, others, that I'm afraid they wouldn't be able to take advantage of this program should it move forward. I also look at, and you can ask almost anyone, whether it be the grocery store or the doctor's office, wherever you go, as to where they live, you'll get a variety of different answers. Some people do choose to commute into town. Others have to commute into the center region because they just can't afford housing here. So they have to live in places like Phillipsburg and Lewistown, Tyrone, Lock Haven, some places even further than that. And one thing that I didn't mention last time that I've thought about this, especially with the number of people that work here that have to commute from outside the area, that can attribute to a lot of travel, transportation. And I think if the township was to take a little bit of a bolder approach in ensuring those who want to live here closer to where they work, closer to shopping and services and public transportation, that by not only opening up our housing affordability to more individuals, we can not only ensure them a home, but I think we can also help reduce that carbon footprint that is being attributed by those that have to live outside the area, but their jobs and occupation is in other essential services and that they rely on are here in Ferguson Township. So that's all I have to add.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And do we have any other members of the public who would like to comment?
Not seeing any other hands or anybody else indicate in the chat.
Okay, thank you. So I'm a little bit gun shy now about taking a motion first. Steve, is it best practice really if you think that there might be changes to not necessarily take that motion first and to ask for discussion from the board first?
You could go either way.
Okay.
I think I've sort of done both, and
Okay.
it just depends on how we end up moving it on, if we need to move it on to another meeting. So I don't think it's a big problem. So.
Also, in terms of closing the public hearing, if I'd like to have discussion for the board before I ask for a motion, should I keep the public hearing open or should I close it?
Well, I guess that's sort of a question of definition of public hearing. I always considered the whole thing a public hearing.
Me too.
Dick always closed the public hearing before taking board motion and discussion.
Okay.
I always just considered it all part of the public hearing.
I do too.
And I think that's not clearly defined anywhere, so.
Okay, so we're gonna wing it a little bit.
I guess that's how I justified just continuing the public hearing, is I didn't
Never
really
closed.
close it as such until the finish, or till the motion was acted on, or it was.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
And I think if we want, if we want to allow the public to come back and make a follow-up comment, then if you close it, and then it just becomes harder. Yeah.
Great. Sounds good. Let's keep that puppy open. And let's go to some board discussion prior to taking a motion. Does the board have any questions or any discussion that we'd like to have about, I know we've seen it quite a few times. We've had a lot of discussion already. Would we like to have any more?
So I think with respect to Jeremy's comments, I support it very much. But the last time we had this, it seemed to say that this is this program is targeting sort of a donut hole, in the sense that people below there is some other program that they can avail of, and maybe not afford, but at least avail. And then people above a certain limit, they can afford it. So, yeah, I mean, in general, I agree with this principle, but it seemed to me that was the logic for this program.
Thank you. I agree with that, Prasenjit. Steve?
Yeah, I don't have any comments on the ordinance as written, but I would like to add a little more to address Jeremy's comments. Is I think the problem you run into with trying to extend this to a lower income level is you reach a level where people cannot get a mortgage in order to buy. So even if you make the house available at a certain level, and I think that's where the ranges come in, is so what you then start talking about is a subsidized program, which is a completely different type of program. Personally, I think especially for rental properties, we might want to consider that sometime later, but it would be a separate program. It would not be part of the affordable housing program. But at the federal level, and I think it's somewhat at the state, there are subsidized programs. If we wanted to try to tie some sort of subsidized program in, that would add a lot of complexity from the township and as far as budgeting and all. But I think it is something worth keeping open as to be considered, and if it could be through the fee in lieu be somewhat supported for subsidies. I don't know if that's even legally possible, but that's the sort of thing that I would encourage looking at in the future. But I think for the purposes of this ordinance, I don't think that we can go below those income guidelines and still be providing housing that is marketable for what we're trying to market. So.
Thanks, Steve. Lisa?
So I have one question for Jenna that I know I've asked and had answered before, and I just need my memory refreshed with the 75 feet. So I apologize for being repetitive, but I just could not recall from our previous discussion why that needs to be why we need the 75-foot allowance in the TSD and not 65. Is it a 55-foot maximum in the TSD?
Right now, the base zoning is 55, and the current Terrace Streetscape District with incentives allows any applicant who provides the workforce housing to go up to 75. And actually, that is a typo in the agenda language. In the actual ordinance itself, it is not to exceed 65 feet.
Okay.
Okay, so just to clarify, that should be 65 feet.
In the agenda language, in the actual attachment ordinance itself, it's at 65 feet. Yes.
Okay. Well, okay, that answers my question. Because if the max was 55, then the additional story brings it to, sorry, 55. The additional story brings it to 65. Okay. Okay, well then that makes sense that didn't make sense to me. So thank you very much for clarifying that. And then my only other comment was, I just want to say I appreciate Jeremy's comments and the other comments we had from the Planning Commission members at the last meeting. They clearly gave the ordinance a lot of thought and a lot of discussion, and I greatly appreciate that. Especially maybe those new members who came in, jumping in now, not knowing the evolution of it over the years. So I just want to thank them for their efforts and just say that I do appreciate those comments. And like Steve said, it's such a targeted program and for this ordinance. And so to try to meet all the needs in one thing would just be, wouldn't work well. So I think for what this is trying to accomplish, I think this iteration of the ordinance improves upon what's already in place in that it allows rentals and particularly the fee in lieu allowance so that the township can have some flexibility working with the land trust or whatever other designee we have in the future to maybe look at different options, like Steve said, but to allow some flexibility and creativity in trying to meet some of these needs that the ordinance itself just can't address. Again, thanks for the comments, and I think the discussion should continue in the future. I don't think this should be the last that we talk about those needs.
Thank you, Lisa. Anyone else? If not, I think we are ready for a motion.
Okay, this is Steve. I will move that the Board of Supervisors adopt the ordinance amending Chapter 27 zoning Part 3, residential plan development and mixed use, Section 304, Terrace Streetscape District by amending 27-304B3 and amending Chapter 27 zoning Part 7, supplemental regulations, Section 716, workforce housing by repealing it and replacing it in its entirety.
This is Lisa. I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I'll just take a moment to then again point out what Jenna and Lisa have pointed out, that in the agenda, just in the agenda, there is an error. It's not to exceed 75 feet in the TSD, but in the ordinance, it's not to exceed 65 feet in the TSD. So just taking a moment to point that out. If we have no other discussion on the ordinance, the motion, or the second, we will take a voice vote. All in favor?
Roll call. It's
Oh.
a-
We'll take a roll call vote. Dave?
Thank you. This is presented as ordinance number 1065. Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Mitra,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Denini.
Yes. Thank you very much. And we will move on to another public hearing on a resolution of the Township of Ferguson, Center County, Pennsylvania, amending Resolution 2020-36 by establishing fees in lieu of workforce housing.
Thank you. So provided with your agenda is a copy of the ordinance, or the resolution, excuse me, that's been advertised for public hearing. As Ms. Denini pointed out, this amends our fee schedule that was just enacted on December 14th by establishing fees in lieu of workforce housing that was just enabled by the ordinance approved a moment ago. So that sets a workforce housing fee in lieu for single-family and detached units at $86,775 per unit, and workforce housing for multifamily units or typically for rental or apartment units at $53,000. Those are a factor of 75% of the cost of construction as determined by Jenna and the Center County Housing and Land Trust, some of the work that they put in as well. And I'm sure Jenna can answer any questions on how those numbers were derived if the board has them, but I know we had talked about them at a previous meeting, so maybe not.
Thank you, Dave. So it's a public hearing, so let's open up the floor to members of the public that would like to make a comment.
Don't see
Okay,
any hands.
seeing none, then I will take a motion from the board, please.
This is Prasenjit. I move that the Board of Supervisors adopt a resolution amending Resolution 2020-36 by establishing fees in lieu of workforce housing.
This is Patty. I second.
Any discussion? All right, we are ready for another roll call vote. Dave?
Thank you. This is presented as Resolution 2021-3. Mr. Mitra,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Strickland,
Yes.
Ms. Denini,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Okay, with that, I'm going to ask how everybody is feeling. Does anybody need a break, or should we move on to our next agenda item? I feel like everybody's ready to move on to our next agenda item. Yeah,
Fine with continuing
Okay.
forward.
great. Let's then move on to a continued discussion about West Whitehall Road stormwater runoff.
I'll ask Dave Modricker to tee this one up for you.
Sure, good evening. So this agenda item is driven by a request from a resident at 6315 West Whitehall Road. You may recall we had some discussion about this topic at a board meeting where we described the issue. The resident had submitted kind of his statement of the problem, and staff had looked at a number of options. We did a site visit, met with the property owner, indicated that to pursue a project, there would need to be discussion and direction from the board. So we did bring that matter in front of the board. And the next step for staff after that last meeting with the board and with the resident present was for staff to prepare an analysis of the drainage area to determine how much of the stormwater was contributory from the public right-of-way and how much was from private property. So we did that, and I'd like to share a drawing with you. The drawing is in your packet. So I've shared the screen just to get you oriented. This long linear line is Whitehall Road. This is Johnson Road. What you can see in the background very faintly are contour lines, dashed lines. This is the location of the residence and the point of interest of concern. The purple, the dark purple, and I'll zoom in on this so you can see it a little bit better, is the public right-of-way that is impervious or roadway. The hatched area is public right-of-way that is pervious. The dark green is private property that is impervious. Hatched green, private property that is pervious or predominantly grass or field. So, as we talked about this last time, let me zoom in here a little bit. I made some reference to, this area of the field and how much may possibly drain. These drainage areas were determined by a field view. A large portion of this upper area does not go to this location behind Bender's home. It follows overland flow or a culvert to another direction. So this long, once again, this long linear shape is the upstream drainage area, predominantly following, a sliver along Whitehall Road. We get near Johnson Road, there's a couple breaks where there's drainage pipes. At this point, This is kind of the bowl-shaped area. So the kind of the road continues in this way, but the topography is such that stormwater is collected from this area. So if we go down and look at the table, well, first the legend. So here's the legend as I described it. If you look at the table, we broke this out 3 different ways. If we look strictly at the drainage area, approximately 37% is public. If you look at it from an impervious area perspective, 77% is public. If you look at it as a percent of total flow in cubic feet per second, about 66% is public. So that's what I wanted to share with you tonight. And I believe tonight, the discussion that you may want to have is whether or not staff is going to be, what direction you provide to staff. If we're going to pursue it, our next step would be to refine a cost estimate based on preparing, more detailed analysis of engineering suitable for construction. Our largest unknown at this point is the location and depth of the Rock Spring water line and condition of the water line near where we think we will need to install a culvert under Whitehall Road to bring water from the north side of Whitehall Road to the south side, run it down a parallel ditch to the creek, to the floodplain. And at that point, I can answer questions. I believe Mr. Bender's in the audience as an attendee, perhaps.
So Dave, is there a way, is it all just commingled, or is there a way we could address the public area part with some project and just do our part and take the water away from there?
So let me share the screen again. So what we could do is that banner right in the middle of things. Here we go. So our thought was to install a cross culvert here. What that would do would eliminate all of this upstream drainage area. It would not eliminate anything below the culvert. So this piece of road, this piece of impervious area, which is in the right of way, but is predominantly, it looks like driveway or pull off areas, not necessarily the road. All these rooftops and all of this kind of oblong bowl shaped hatched area, it would not remove that. So it would remove probably a majority or over 50% of the purple area, which is public. When it does that, it'll also remove these little pieces of private because it's flowing onto the road. So it's too hard to say we can separate that out.
Okay, thank you.
So there
Steve.
there would still be, drainage to that location. It is in a bowl. What we've proposed after looking at a number of alternatives, if we do something, is what I described.
I'd just like to say that I support us moving forward with this project, and I would, as a matter of fact, support moving forward this year instead of going through the CIP process. My reason is I know there's been some question about whether we'd be creating a precedent handling a stormwater problem on a private property, but my feeling is the precedent really exists already. I was thinking about it over the weekend, knowing that this was going to be on the agenda, and I can think of 4 things that projects we've undertaken for similar purposes since I've been on the board, and Dave can correct me if I'm misrepresenting any of these. but one was on Selder Circle in Pine Grove Mills. We bought a house and did modifications to other private property because of flooding due to the fact that essentially that neighborhood was built in the floodplain of Slab Cabin Run. So it was a case where the contribution was not the township's responsibility, except in having let it be built there. But, you know, there was a big problem. I know the first year I was on, I went to watch during a storm as the township was putting sandbags along the roadway to keep it from running into people's garages. And it was a major project that we undertook to take care of flooding in a neighborhood. Another one was Horseshoe Circle. We made modifications to allow water to drain away when people were using a sump pump in their basement, essentially because in that area the basements were below the water table when we got really wet years. So water was flowing into the basements, people would pump it out and would run back in. We made modifications to change the flow away from the house. Madison Street, when we worked on that street, we put, I believe, 1 million gallon detention tank underneath the street to hold stormwater as it accumulates and gradually let it flow out because of flooding in a neighborhood. And then a couple of years ago, we approved a fairly expensive project on Kansas Avenue that was designed to create drainage on the street because water was puddling and freezing, you know, forming ice. So I think we've done these in the past. This particular one, because it's inundating a septic field, I think is a public health problem as well as a flooding problem for the property. So I really see this as even a bigger deal than some of the others. So that's where I stand on it. I'd like to hear what anybody else thinks before I make a motion, but I do intend to make a motion that we move forward with this.
So one more question for Dave Matraker. So when we put this culvert and we are, handling some of the flow, like you said with the numbers, the culvert thing will take care of some of the water, which is the long flow that would come in. How much of that is due to the public property, and how much of it is due to the private, or is it too difficult to estimate? I'm just assuming that you did some estimates for the other things, so whether this is possible for this one too.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I could estimate and say that, probably it looks like about half of the drainage area, including half of the impervious area or more than half of the impervious area, would be directed elsewhere. And then of that area that we would direct elsewhere, certainly the majority of it is public right of way, because the impervious area and the public right of way is what's generating more runoff than the private area that is farm field. So I don't have a number, but I would say if we are eliminating over half of the flow, of that half, probably 90% of that is ours.
Mm-hmm. And so in this case, I would possibly support us going ahead and doing this. But in some case, if we are, let's say, 30% or 40% and the rest is private, are these things doable with sort of shared private-public funding, or would it be too much of a burden on the, cases where in the past the private owners had to pay for some of it, or is it not enforceable?
In the examples that Steve Miller described, those were all publicly funded. There was no cost sharing that I can recall. During the stormwater fee study, there was discussion about setting aside some funding for public-private partnerships, and that the percent share would be based on, the contributory area from public versus private. I have not had a discussion with, the affected homeowner. During one of the last, I think it was the last board meeting on this topic, a attendee spoke up and, noted cost sharing as something that the board might want to consider.
I think I would just add to that. I think in the context of that discussion, the suggestion was made that perhaps some of the upstream private property owners that were contributory to the stormwater issue downstream may be willing to participate or enter into an agreement. I don't know that there'd be a great deal of incentive for those property owners. We haven't actually approached them, but essentially you'd be approaching them to ask them to solve a problem that they weren't really affected by, although they were contributing to it. And I don't think that we would have a mechanism in place, or I know in fact that we would not have a mechanism in place right now to compel or require them to, whether a civil matter between two property owners where one is, kind of unloading runoff on the adjacent property, whether that might resolve through a different mechanism, a cost sharing structure, that it would be out of our hands. But the only arrangement that we've discussed in the past that I'm aware of is what Dave just described, which would be that either through a stormwater fee structure or a stormwater program that maybe addressed this issue in a separate manner, it's possible that capital improvements or maintenance obligations or other kinds of expenses that are transferred to a private property owner could be offset based on the proportion of public runoff that is contributed to some of those stormwater management features, or in this case, that ends up unloading on a private property that could be corrected by stormwater management features and capital improvements.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa?
So thanks, Dave Modricker. This was really helpful. So I am grateful that you went through this process and got this information out so that I can make sure I'm reading it correctly and understanding what you're saying. So you're saying that the water that's affecting this or these properties, 66% of it is runoff from public right-of-way or public property.
In terms of the amount of water that's generated in cubic feet per second, yes.
Okay. And then was it just this one house, or are all those neighboring houses also affected by this? I couldn't remember if we had comment from.
It flows, through one of the house to the west. It would flow through their backyard, but it doesn't. Once it flows, I believe predominantly it ponds on the one property. I don't recall if some of it has ponded in the past, onto other properties also, but the geographic flow area is the Bender residence.
Gotcha. Okay. So the project that you would propose would reduce that flow by all of it. It would be diverting it in a different direction, or if you could just kind of summarize.
Yeah, sure. Let me do it with a visual. So the water, can you see my hand moving?
Yes, thanks.
So the water in this area, so basically the water west of Johnson Road. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So the water that's flowing to this point, west of Johnson Road, would no longer flow to this point. It would come down this side of Whitehall Road. And I am going to switch screens now. Am I sharing a Google map?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so the water west of Whitehall Road would all come down along this side of Whitehall Road in a channel to the floodplain and then flow in the creek.
Mhm.
And the water that falls in this area, kind of this bowl area, we would not be able to do anything with it.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, that's how I was envisioning what you were describing, and thanks.
Mhm.
Okay, and then thanks also to Steve for listing out those other projects, because that was one of my concerns when we talked about this before, was how is this similar to other projects? The only one I was familiar with was the Piney Ridge project, and I wasn't that familiar with it. So thanks for listing those other ones. And Dave Modricker, I guess I was wondering if the percentage of township, not township responsibility, but public owned contribution to those water problems in those other instances, is that similar to what we're looking at here, or were those, overwhelmingly street runoff, or do we not know? Does that question make sense?
No, it makes sense. I was formulating my answer. They're all different. The one on Selder's Circle, I know at least the board at the time was trying to be particular about crafting 3 criteria, which the project met to justify it. And I can't even recall what they were anymore. But as Steve mentioned, that was not public water. That was Slab Cabin Run overflowing its banks. And predominantly it was because when the development was built, the analysis at the time that thought they could contain a 100-year storm, under today's analysis contains about a 2-year storm. So, significantly different in the amount of stormwater. And it's also a very karst drainage way. So it also depends if the sinkholes in that drainage way are taking water or not. But rain's heavy and it no longer takes water. We had the flooding that Steve mentioned, not from public infrastructure, but from Pine Grove Mountain and the drainage way all the way down through there. The other interesting thing about that development was it was originally designed with an open channel along the side of the road. And at some point the developer requested and the township allowed it to be enclosed in a conduit. So that's where, the Saraceno home at the time when they lived there is the ones that we would sandbag, like Steve said. And then it was, actually another property owner where we bought the home. The Horseshoe Circle, that was more an instance of, during our design, accommodating sumps from people's basements, because they're in a very low area that gets wet, not related to the public roadway or public impervious area. But we did a design that would allow and accommodate basements to be pumped out, into a stormwater system that we had. So they're all a little bit unique. We've been able to solve a number of drainage problems over the years, but specifically when it's really related to or affects a particular residence, all of those matters went before the board for discussion. So I appreciate your having the discussion tonight. Staff just felt it warranted that, and not something that we were just going to go out and build.
One common theme I think that ties some of these projects together, as well as some of our own capital improvement projects, and even some of the projects that in the past we've elected not to participate in, is that infrastructure is either getting worse because of age or dilapidation or other conditions that have affected it, or frankly the precipitation, as Dave pointed out, is becoming more intense throughout the years and more than what a lot of this infrastructure was originally designed to handle. 100-year storm becoming a 10-year storm or a 5-year storm. So I think that's part of the issue that we're seeing. Maybe it's not a new issue that, Mr. Bender and some of his neighbors are dealing with, but it's certainly exacerbated by, some of the additional stormwater that we're being asked to treat and additional runoff that we're dealing with because of rainier and rainier seasons each year. So I think if there is a common thread is that it's, there's added need for attention and likely to be more of these issues that pop up here and there in the coming years.
Thanks. Thank you for that. That's a good point. Did that resident, Mr. Bender, did he also, I'm trying to recall, mention if there was some difference over the years that this problem has worsened? I was trying to remember the timeline. Like, was there work done on either Johnson Road or Whitehall that had exacerbated the problem?
There may have been, and it's hard to ascertain that. And so when I was discussing this with staff, we didn't attempt that. I don't know if it really would have made a difference, but Whitehall Road was realigned in that area maybe, I'm guessing 50 years ago. So, around that time frame, I think there was one resident that attended our meeting that was there when the road, was realigned and recalls where it used to be. The base of the road was much lower.
Okay.
So definitely, when the road was raised, it may have contributed to, the bowl type of configuration in some of those backyards. Not 100% certain about that, but I think that was whether or not that occurred, but I think that was what was discussed, that it may have, yes.
Okay, thanks for that. I was trying to recall what exactly you said about the timeline.
Yeah, whatever occurred would have been when it was owned by the state prior to it being turned over to the township.
Right.
Yeah, I think those comments were based on memories of people who were there before Dave started working for the township. So
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's hard to tell how accurate or how much the effect was, because I think the people who remembered it are no longer around. They've just passed it on. So
yeah.
And then we were deciding, well, how much is from the road, and what if the road wasn't here? And then we discussed, well, if the road wasn't here, guess what? The houses wouldn't be here.
Right.
Deep conversations.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. And so I think how I'm viewing this is what you've shown to us in the map and your data collection is that, a really significant portion of the problems being contributed by public water runoff. So I guess I would be supportive moving forward with looking at a project to look at this. And then two, I think you bringing this to the board is appreciated so that we can have these discussions and look at all of these things, types of issues like Steve recounted, the Salter Circle and Horseshoe Circle, to look at all those individually because they are all individual and unique situations that takes some time to discuss and look into to make an informed and appropriate decision. So I think this was really worthwhile. And it was a really, it's an interesting situation to kind of think through. So anyways, I appreciate all the discussion and the work you put in so far.
Can I just ask you to elaborate a little bit more on your concern about the water line that if you divert it off, what's involved with that?
Sure. So in the location where we're suggesting or proposing that we install a cross culvert or storm pipe under Whitehall Road, there is a rock spring water line in that location. And elevation wise, a lot of times the water line and the stormwater pipe like to be at about the same elevation. So we have to figure out what elevation that water line is at so that when we design and build our storm pipe, we don't interfere with it. If we do interfere with it, we'll have to ask that it be relocated so that we can get our storm pipe through. And if we can't resolve that matter, then we're gonna have to come back to the board because obviously both of those things are important and we have to preserve the integrity of the water line. So we're hoping we can go under the water line. If we can't get under it, then we might have to ask the water line to be lowered. If we're asking the water line to be lowered, then there's kind of a process we go, go through because the water line is in our public right of way. And then it depends who has prior rights as to who has to pay for it. And then there's the entire, scheduling of that work. And even if we don't have to lower it, we have to be cautious because it may be a transite water line. Sometimes with old transite water lines, just the mere fact that you're digging near them can cause problems like breaks in the water line. So it's just, if we were dealing with the State College Borough Water Authority, we would, be able to approach it one way. We're dealing with Rock Spring Water. It's often more difficult for them to locate their lines. We'll go through the PA one call process. So that's a little bit of an unknown.
Yeah, my understanding is that even thinking about moving a transite water line can make a break, can it?
Yeah, whenever we're working over Rock Spring water lines doing paving, we no longer use a vibratory roller. So we just use a static roller and increase, change our roller pattern so that we don't induce any more stresses than we need to the water line.
Which to translate from the engineer means that, we don't always get the compaction that we hope to get from the road surfaces when we're doing paving projects, when we can't use a vibratory roller, because if you think about a roller that's vibrating, you can get it a lot tighter and more compact with some of your sub base. And so that becomes a little bit of an issue. We do the best we can, but for the reasons that were cited before, we do modify our specs a little bit for what we expect in some of those areas, just in order to preserve the integrity of some of that water line.
So not to get off on a tangent here, so that relates then to the durability of the road because you can't compact it as much.
It does, but I will say that we have achieved satisfactory compaction with static rolling when we set up a static rolling pattern ahead of time and do nuclear density testing. So we might have to increase the number of passes, but we for the most part, not always, but for the most part, we have been successful. So that was a concern that we had that Dave described. What we found, our experiences showed us with, at least with the recent paving that we've been doing, we've gotten pretty good results.
So I guess for Dave Pavolk, I have a question. To move forward with this, do you think you need a motion to proceed with it? Or
As Dave pointed out, I think, the next steps would be for staff to, put a little more time and energy into developing a cost estimate, a scope, before we even move into real heavy design and everything, to start putting some pen to paper. So, even before we kind of went down that road, we wanted to put this in front of the board and see if it was a project you were interested in undertaking. If it is, I think a motion is warranted just to get the ball rolling on it. And then as we can, put some numbers together, I would, respectfully encourage this to be considered as part of the capital improvement program process. I understand there's, some urgency and a desire to move maybe more quickly on it. And depending on the fate of some other things that are being considered, that may change. But, I think in just working it into the normal capital improvement programming process, but we could prepare information material in advance of that to present back to the board. And if we run into any real issues, we'll try to keep you apprised of them as they emerge, if they do.
Yeah, after hearing Dave's explanation what's involved, I think I may have been pushing a little too hard to try to say it for this year. So I would make a motion that we include this project in the capital improvement program and authorize staff to proceed to do the cost estimates and the preliminary work.
I'll second that. Laura? Oh, right, I'm the chair.
Waiting for you to do something, Maria.
So I'll ask for more discussion, and Steve, you made the motion, so I'll offer that opportunity to you first.
I think I did my discussion prior to the motion, so.
Okay. I do have just a quick follow-up. Patty kind of explored the item I wanted to explore, which is the water line consideration. So do I understand then that both the water line and the proposed stormwater pipeline would be on the west side of Johnson Road? So going across Whitehall, but on the west side of Johnson Road. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. I think the water line is on the, I'm going to call it the north side of Whitehall and the west side of Johnson. I believe that's correct.
Got you. Okay.
If I'm wrong, I'm still correct in that we have a concern for utility conflict that we have to resolve. Okay.
And you're the engineer, so you would know about that, but I'm just like scrambling, thinking like, can we avoid this? Can we avoid this in any way? Okay, thank you. That was my only question.
No, if we can, we'll, investigate that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So my question was in sort of lines with what I was asking before. Maybe I wasn't as clear. So in this case, or in general, I think a reasonably fair solution would be that we get into some sort of private-public partnership where, we cover the part. Let's suppose 90% of the water is estimated to be coming from public parts, like the road. Then we would cover 90% of the costs, and 10% would fall on essentially whoever wants to get it done. Now, as a civil matter, if they want to follow up with someone who is upstream saying you are causing this water and so on, that's up to them. So is that even feasible, or does that have other complications?
I think the answer to both your questions is yes, probably. I think it would be feasible. Absolutely. I mean, that would require, kind of a voluntary arrangement to be made with the property owners, maybe Mr. Bender and his neighbor, in this case, where they would agree to cover the proportion of private runoff, although it would be generated upstream from them, that would be associated with the cost of the improvements, and the township would cover the public runoffs. And then, as you mentioned, Mr. Mitra, it would be on them to, subrogate or approach it in a different way if they were trying to recoup those costs from the actual, generators, if you will, of the upstream runoff. I think that arrangement would be more feasible, and I'm just talking feasibility. I'm not talking about, whether it would be desirable on the part of the property owner, than an arrangement where the township would partner with the upstream property owners who presumably aren't feeling any of the negative effects from the runoff that they're generating, and they would be, funding a capital improvement to benefit another property owner further downstream. I think the complexities of it would come into, just thinking through it a little bit and off the cuff would come into how that agreement were structured, how that obligation were maintained, how would enforcement be handled? What about continuing maintenance beyond the construction of the capital and project? All things that, are surmountable, all things that we could solve. But I think it would be complicated to do. And again, that's predicated on an assumption that that the property owners would be willing to participate or partner in that.
Steve?
Yeah, I guess whether it's feasible or not, I would not support taking that route, because essentially, you're saying that the water is generated upstream is, it's somebody else's responsibility because they happen to be at a higher elevation. I don't see a court supporting that. It's possible they would, but I think this is the sort of situation where, to me, it seems like you can't really place responsibility for water flowing downhill on the people who are uphill, and it sort of becomes a community responsibility because a problem exists. It is the township responsibility as the community, rather than the responsibility of the person who owns the higher ground. I mean, if you had that higher ground was all paved and water's running off, I could see where you could make a case. But we're talking basically about unpaved field where the water is running down. So, I mean, that's just a comment that I would consider that, or I don't consider that to be really a feasible option in terms of.
So I mean, that's really where the plot thickens, because you can almost continue that narrative and even take it further, whereas some of that publicly generated runoff is unloaded on public right-of-way from other private properties even further upstream that haven't been captured by our analysis thus far. And then conversely, on the other side, we have properties that are doing, essentially, if you took Mr. Bender's backyard and called it a stormwater basin, by our ordinance right now, that would fall under Mr. Bender's responsibility to, maintain in accordance with our standards. We'd have a mechanism in place to, enforce that if that basin were not functioning as designed. And even in that case where it was treating upstream development, there's no remedy that property owner would be entitled to. And we have many of these throughout the township that treat upstream runoff from other developments that either, discharge into basins that are owned by property owners associations or condo owners associations, or even in many cases, just private properties that have those obligations or responsibilities themselves. So, it's a very systemic, problem, so to speak, that has a lot of different tentacles to it, which was really a large driver of the consideration for the stormwater fee. And part of the work that was done over the last couple of years is to see how can we make this a more equitable arrangement, or how can we partner, with the community in order to kind of, cover some of those, either those costs in as a cost share, which is what has been discussed as part of that program, or even, kind of through some other means that might level the playing field a little bit. But that's a different discussion for another time.
Deep, definitely. Yeah. Okay, we do have a motion and a second. Any more discussion on the motion? Okay, if not, I'm going to call for a vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? I think that,
Could you
I'm sorry,
just,
Gail.
could you say what the motion was again? I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. Steve, do you want to recap your motion?
Okay, the motion was to add this project to the CIP discuss, or for at the time of the CIP discussion, to add it into the CIP, and to authorize staff to do the preliminary work to determine costs and the feasibility.
Do we want to go back to more discussion? Am I violating a procedure? Does anybody have any questions or more discussion on that motion?
Oh, you can take it back to that if
Great.
you want. If things aren't clear, we can continue discussion.
Okay.
No, I just wanted to hear the,
Yeah.
I just wanted to hear the motion again. I sort of forgot what was involved.
I understand.
Yeah, I had a question about the wording of the motion too. So thank you for asking. Just so your motion was to add it to the CIP.
Right. Which
Okay.
means it'll be part of our discussion.
And that'll be part of our discussion at that time. So, okay. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, great. So now I'm going to call for a vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, sounds like that motion passed unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your work on that. Okay, I'm going to keep going unless I see somebody's hand up in distress for a break. All right. Next, we're moving on to new business, and we have the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda. This is Steve.
This is Lisa. I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Motion passes. Second, under new business. Board member request, Park and Rec Ordinance Amendment. That is my request. So I'll introduce it. A brief introduction. In the attachments, I've got several attachments, but the main focus that I would like here is to just review the Park and Recreation ordinances that we have in Ferguson Township. So what we cover in our code that relates to Park and Rec. And there's kind of multiple reasons why I wanted to review that, and that I think will become clear as I move through. But basically, there seems to be perhaps some errors, perhaps some things are missing, perhaps some things are out of date. And so I thought maybe just reviewing it in a methodical way, we don't have to move any changes tonight. It's a little bit overwhelming. We can just kind of look at each piece and kind of review it. If we feel moved, we can make a motion. So there are, I think, 4 attachments. There's chapter 16. There's also the authority, the articles of incorporation of the authority. And then there are the articles of agreement with the COG. And then there is an excerpt about food trucks. So it's sort of all over the map. So I'm going to take each one and present it to you for discussion. So the first item, I think it is maybe the second attachment. I'm not sure. Tonight for me, for some reason, one of my agendas wouldn't open properly. So I'm using a different agenda than I'm used to. So it's kind of thrown me off a little bit. So I'm using the linked agenda, and I'm looking at section 1-1122. And that is the Articles of Incorporation document for the Park Authority. And now that's in our code, but that document is not something that we can amend as a township. But the attachment should show under 1-1122 a proposal of Center Region Park and Rec that we saw come across our desk, I don't know, a couple months ago now, that we should change the Articles of Incorporation document to change the name of the Park Authority. We can't actually do that. So I wanted to make a note And maybe Dave, you can look into this. If you need to consult the solicitor, fine. But if you scroll down to the 1-1124, that's where you see the name change of that entity in our code, which is done through an amendment to the Articles of an Incorporation of the authority. And that's done at the state level. And then we just put that into our code. So we can't actually change any of that text. So I wanted to circle back around to that. So I guess my action item, which I'm not really proposing a motion. I mean, it's just information to follow up on. But if you'd like a motion because it's directing staff, I'd be glad to propose that. But the follow-up would be, can you confirm with perhaps the solicitor and Park and Rec, did they actually mean to propose that change? Perhaps was that an error? And then for the solicitor, isn't it correct that we cannot actually make that change where that change is proposed? And I want to stop there and ask for board questions about that portion of my discussion. And then I'll move on to chapter 16, which is actually part of our code that we can change. So first I'll open it up to questions about the proposed change that came from Park and Rec for 1-1122. Steve, it looks like you might be ready to ask a question about that. I'm not sure.
Not really. I'm sort of trying to figure out what the wording means that I'm looking at here.
Sure.
On the amendment, because my assumption is the amendment would have to be something that would be passed by all of the participating municipalities.
Correct.
In establish the.
Correct.
And
we
so
did that, and that's what shows up in 1-1124. But you can't go back and change the name in 1122 because that's your original Articles of Incorporation. Right. That's a state document.
Yeah, although once the amendment was filed, I think it becomes part of the.
I don't think so, but this maybe is a question for the solicitor. If so, we'll change it. But my understanding of how that works is that amendment serves as the amendment in full, and it's added to the Articles of Incorporation document.
Right.
Otherwise, all your previous documents that have that name would then be kind of like cut off, right, from their history.
Yeah, that sounds like a legal question to me.
Okay. So Dave, did you need like a motion to follow up with in either manner that way?
Nope, this is just a request for information, not so much action. I can chase that. I think
thank you. And then did any board members have any other questions or comments or concerns about that? Okay, great.
I'm sorry. I'm sort of totally confused now a little bit. And so can you tell me what are we trying to do here? What is it, eventually we want to do? So I'm sort of lost in that sense. Yeah.
Sure. There's a couple different goals. One is to continue the discussion that was started by the Center Region Park and Rec Agency. So they, a couple months ago, sent us 2 of the 4 documents that are attachments. One of them was our own chapter 16, and one was, I'm sorry, I don't have the chapter. It falls under 1-1122. Is that under it's like under chapter 1, I believe. That would be chapter 1.
That's the administrative code, correct? Administration of government.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So Center Region Park and Rec proposed that we change our code in the manner that's highlighted in red. And yeah, at the time, I don't have any philosophical disagreement with changing our code so it's up to date. I want to do that. But in this particular case, I don't think that we should be changing the name of the authority in the Articles of Incorporation document, because that's a document that's filed with the state and we basically duplicate it in our own code.
Mhm.
So in this case, what I'm saying is we as an entity are saying, I see that you, Center Region Park and Rec, would like us to change something in our code. And I'm concerned that maybe that's not the manner in which we handle it, because that's an article of incorporation. And if it's filed with the state that way, it should stay that way. The name change is handled later in the amendment to the Articles of Incorporation. And that's also in our code. And that provides our historical documentation of how that name did change. But we don't then go in there and like scratch it out and change it to something else. That's like just a duplicate document of something. And I myself was like, this is interesting how in the Ferguson Township Code, this is getting like really sort of deep code structural philosophical conversation here. But I found it interesting when I first was reading our code years ago that we do this thing with authorities that we participate in, where we kind of duplicate their articles of incorporation into our code. And so in this particular instance, I'm saying, I think maybe it should stay that way. It already handles what Pam and that agency is concerned about, but it handles it in this appropriate way. We can get our solicitor's opinion on it though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Now in chapter 16, Park and Recreation, I'm proposing maybe some different things, and tonight we can just like have a conversation about it. So as I read through chapter 16, which also is the continuation of a conversation that Center Region Park and Rec sent us our own chapter 16. And they had several things that they wanted changed in there. So like one thing was unmanned aircraft. If you recall, that's fine. But as I was reading the proposed changes, I was reading it in the context of all of chapter 16. And I realized it's maybe, while Center Region Park and Rec has a perspective of they want to see these certain things changed, which I don't have any opposition to, I'm reading our own code and realizing how kind of out of date it is, chapter 16. So again, this is perhaps going to be a code revision, but I don't necessarily want to propose these changes via motion tonight, because I want us to have a chance to all think about it, because it's a lot to think about at once. But I want to review it with you. I've already reviewed that part of the code based on my participation with like the Center Region Park and Rec comprehensive plan and kind of the relationship that we've got with Center Region Park and Rec, how I know that that's changed over time, maybe some of the archaic language that we have. So hopefully it'll become a little bit more clear. I'll run through it. It is starting to get late and I don't want to kind of overwhelm folks with it. So we'll just take it, run through it, ask questions, maybe set it aside, come back to it later. So for example, if you go to chapter 16, section 101, in that section, you'll see some definitions. There are some definitions that are lacking that I think that if we had in there, they would provide us some clarity. So a lot of times we're all confused about Center Region Park and Rec Agency, Center Region Park and Rec Authority, Center Region Park and Rec Department, Center Region Park and Rec COG. So there's kind of like all of these things. Let's define them in our ordinance. So when we mention them later, it's clear. So what don't we define that we mention later? We don't define Center Region Park and Recreation Board, although we mention it later. We don't define Center Regional Recreation Authority, which is the old name that still exists in our ordinance here that we can change. How Pam wanted to change the other part, section 1, where we shouldn't change it, we can change it here. It's totally fine to change it here, and it makes sense to change it here. So in our own code under 16-101, in the first blurb, we refer to Center Regional Recreational Authority. That should be changed to Center Region Parks and Recreation Authority to bring it up to date to the new name. That, I think maybe Pam just missed that reference. So we can run that past her. I'm sure she would probably want that changed because that's the appropriate name. So we should put it in the definitions and we should call it the correct name throughout the ordinance, basically. Also in the definition, if you look, this is something I want to talk to the chief about and something I want to run past the board. There are multiple places where we give the authority and we define a specially appointed parks police officer. And I'm not sure what the history is of this. And I certainly would think that Center Region Park and Rec can enforce their own policy in their own way. But I think that it would be prudent to remove this designation of Center Region Park and Rec police officer. So it's actually under the definition of police officer there, as if we sort of give policing authority in some manner that's actually policing authority, not policy enforcement. So yeah, Lisa.
What page are you on, or where was that?
Yeah, that's under section, the section 6. I'm sorry, it's like a little bit late and I'm early in chapter 16-101. I will tell you, I'm so sort of discombobulated with trying to use this agenda with links. I'm like on page 100,098,098. I'm not sure. It's page, let me see here. So chapter 16 on the agenda that I am currently using tonight, which is the one with links, chapter 16 attachment starts on page 124 of my agenda, if that helps.
I can do a screen share too, might.
Oh, okay. That'd be great. That would be, I think, really good for tonight.
So
Yes. So if you go down to, so here's the section 16-101 radio. So up high here, we talk about Center Region Park and Recreation Board. Here we talk about Center Regional Recreation Authority. That's out of date. That should be changed to Center Region Park and Rec. No, wait, let me get it right. Center Region Parks and Recreation Authority. So I think Pam just missed that notation there because she asked for it to be changed in a place it couldn't be changed, but here where it can be changed, it wasn't requested. Okay. So it's kind of like some of it is somewhat trivial and just kind of cleaning up our ordinance, and then some gets into some policy depth, which is why I don't necessarily think we should try to make any decisions necessarily tonight. So then if you look at police officer as defined in this ordinance, and it'll come up later as having certain authorities, any peace officer of the Township of Ferguson or state of Pennsylvania, or any employee of the Department of Parks and Recreation appointed as a special police officer for the purpose of the enforcement of law and order within parks. So that's why I wanted to ask for the history. Like, I'm fine with our own police policing our parks. But given what some of the things that folks could encounter there, I don't know what it means to have a special police officer that's an employee of Park and Rec. And I know that they don't have training like crisis intervention training. So when I saw that there, it seems like it's out of date. Or, maybe something we want to consider perhaps taking out, or ask the chief if that ever happens. And or all of those three. Chief Albright, are you with us? And have you ever appointed a special police officer for the purpose of law and order within parks that came from the Park and Rec Department? Well, maybe we could follow up with the chief later if he's not on the call.
He's here. He's muted.
Oh,
I couldn't see my screen to unmute it because
sorry, I couldn't see you trying to unmute.
I was trying to find a button, but I couldn't find it. I have never seen that term, and I have never seen it used in any way, shape, or form. So I have no idea what reference that terminology is being used. I know some places have park police, so I don't know if they envisioned, that as a term to keep open just in case they got big enough that they could enforce their own rules.
Thank you.
Well, to be fair, Chief's only been here for 30
Couple years.
may have predated him.
Yeah, but in this case, this is our ordinance, right? So this is not.
That's right.
So we can fix this to a Title I, which is just to make it our police. And then if we need to give access to others, let that be a policy decision by future boards or whoever takes it up.
That's right. That's right. And my goal here was to tighten up the whole ordinance. And so I think that after our discussion tonight, maybe as a next step, what I would do is I would come in after, hearing others' opinion, make a specific proposal. The motion would be to remove this text from this place. So I didn't want to kind of, try to do too much too fast. But yes, it's our code and we can modify it as we see fit. So then the next point, I think it's 16-107. That's where you'll see I think center region. Is that where? I might have written down the wrong notation. I had that you'll see Center Region Park and Recreation Authority. Somewhere later, you'll just see that the correct name is used. So I'll come back with a request that our motion would be to any place we see the old out-of-date name that we put the new name in.
So in this 107, it's called Center Region Parks and Recreation Department. So that will change all of that to the same CRRA.
Well, I'll tell you what, Prasenjit, that
RPR.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually a point of confusion because the Center Region Park and Recreation Department is different than the Center Region Park and Recreation Authority. So the way I would propose when I come back with the same agenda item, basically, that we handle that for everybody's sanity's sake is in that definition section. We define Center Region Park and Recreation Department. We define Center Region Park and Recreation Authority, and we define Center Region Park and Recreation Board. So the department is actually different than the authority.
Okay, got it. I mean, this thing is titled Center Region Parks and Recreation Department, but it doesn't say how that is formed or who that is and so on. So that'll be helpful. Yeah, thanks.
Yep, exactly. I just thought maybe like baby steps, get it cleaned up and then help us all have better understanding of how it's all organized. Okay, so then we'll go back up to section 16-102. Thank you, Dave, so much for doing this. Okay, 16-102. I do not understand item D or E. I do not understand really the language of it. And Dave, maybe you could take a look at this for us. So what is the point of my lack of understanding? Well, in D, and this might just be language that's so out of date that I don't know how to read it. Acts not unlawful. So what we're saying is, unless it's stated as unlawful, it's not unlawful. But what I don't understand in the clause in the proper and necessary execution of the terms of any agreement with the Department of Park and Rec, how police officer relates to, I just don't understand. I don't understand that passage.
The only example that springs to mind on this would be, well, I shouldn't say it because it doesn't really apply anymore, but there was a time when we prohibited firearms to be carried in public parks. Well, that would be a prohibition that would not apply to law enforcement officers. Now we don't prohibit that, so it's kind of a moot point, but perhaps that's what this provision is getting at. I agree.
I see. Okay. Got you. I might just propose some regular language. I'm pretty sure we keep
animals, things like that. We sometimes do.
Yeah. I think we still prohibit firearms in parks. Okay, I'm going to have to reread this. Okay, so then, but before we get off track, then item E, permits. Any act otherwise prohibited by these rules and regulations, provided it is not otherwise prohibited by law or local ordinance, shall be lawful if performed under, by virtue of, and strictly in compliance with the provisions of a permit and to the extent authorized thereby. Is that a permit that is issued by us?
Probably by the Parks Department. Again, I'm just, kind of speculating a little bit, but, I can tell you that the previous Parks Director was very protective of permit issuance within Parks property. So there really was not a lot of permitting done by the township office itself. It was really all centralized with the Center Region Parks and Recreation Department. And really that hasn't changed. I can't think of any permits that we would issue. Special events permits don't really apply to parks, except in that where things like processions, like if you had a 5K or a race, started in a park, went on a township road, and then maybe came back to the park or whatever it might be. There might be some overlap there, but generally the Parks Department handles all permitting for activities within the parks themselves.
So,
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so my reading of E is that what it's saying is that, whatever is not allowed by these rules, we can allow it by a permit and then it'll be okay. Is that correct?
Well, my question does relate to who's doing the permitting,
Right.
whether it's us or Center Region Park and Rec, and it'll come up again in this same part of the code 16. There's permits that are talked about again.
Mm-hmm.
So again, to try to keep things moving and not to take up much time, maybe I will come back with I'm sorry, was that your hand, Chief? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to tell you real quick, under definitions, it talks about permits and it mentions that the authority of the Director of Parks and Rec
Okay.
issuing them.
Okay, so that's up in definitions.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Okay. All right. Then I guess my next question would be, basically, as the ordinance was, if you go down, Dave, there's rules about treatment of park property, dog control, and speeding. And so those are all under the authority of our police to
enforce.
enforce. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then it goes back to in section, I think 16-106. Yeah, go ahead down a little bit. We have regulated uses, and these are by Center Region Park and Rec.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, I guess I'll think about that a little bit and see if I want to propose some changes. Then 16-107, it says under letter A to fix time that in item number 1, it states that the director of Center Region Park and Recreation Department has the authority to fix times when parks are open for public use. Is that accurate, or do we not fix times that parks are open for public use? I think we do, because we Ferguson Township have the rule that parks are closed after dusk.
On to dusk, right?
Okay.
Or dusk to dawn, right?
Okay, so that's
yeah,
that's incorrect there. And if not, I would argue policy-wise, I think that it should be incorrect. I think that they're our parks and we should fix times when they're open to the public. As we do, actually, currently. I guess I would ask board members if they have an issue over just keeping it as it is, where we, Ferguson Township, fix times where our parks are open to the public. And then if it's okay to keep it that way, can we change the code so it just basically removes that? I don't think we have to address it in any way.
Well, I think the problem is the word time. Is it maybe hours is the better word?
Sure.
I'm just, do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, I agree that we fix the hours, but I think that my point was that it's not COG department that fixes our hours.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
And I don't know, Patty, it's so much. I don't know if it's confusing. So like in 16-107, number 1, it says here, so on and so forth, protect the safety of users of parks and their facilities. The director of the Center Region Park and Recreation Department, that would be right now Pam, has the authority to fix the hours. And she actually, I mean, they don't, we do.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we should change it so that they do, but we of course will work with them. If there's, obviously, it's to our own mutual benefit. If Pam is saying, oh, I'm having a terrible problem with behavior in a park, we might need to close it earlier or something. I mean, we'd probably, frankly, hear that from Chief Albright before we'd hear it from Pam. But if we did hear it from Pam, we'd certainly accommodate for that. But this is just inaccurate.
I think 16B, although I would suggest we make the language gender neutral, but aside from that, 16B gives the authority to the director to restrict use, and temporarily for an emergency or other thing, something's broken, they could say this is temporarily closed. That authority is fine, but the regular hours, I think we can set.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing up the gender neutrality. I think that I've suggested this years ago for our administrative code that the entire thing be made appropriately gender neutral. And I totally noticed it in this ordinance as well. There's a way that you can make something gender neutral without saying the words, which they do in this ordinance, which tells me it's very old. He stands for everything. That's their way of making it gender neutral, as opposed to using pronouns like they, their, or s/he. So I would come back with the suggestion that we make this gender neutral as well, since you brought it up.
I would support that. I mean, if we are changing things in a document, we can change
Yeah.
that document at least. I mean, I understand going through all our code might be a huge task, but yeah.
Yes. And then I think there's a conflict here. Dave, we might have lost the highlight. Is this where Center Region Park and Rec asked us to change the authority to fix, charge, and collect fees from the Center Region Park and Recreation Department to the Park Authority?
Yes, I believe so. That would be
Okay.
under this provision D.
Okay, so this is a deeper policy question, and I'll then try to kind of like maybe separate this out as a different agenda item. And this relates to whether COG and all of its committee structure has purview over setting fees, as is currently in our ordinance, or whether the Center Region.
Sorry, I did a new share to
No, that's good. Sorry, I
that's
stopped.
the language that's
Whether the Center Region Park and Rec Authority, which is a completely different entity, has the authority to fix fees. This relates to a much larger discussion, which I don't want to have tonight, but I want to introduce it, that relates to the Articles of Agreement, that is about the COG program and the COG committee structure, and where we have as elected official purview, or the Park Authority. The Park Authority was established to invest in capital projects, for example, the pools and the regional parks. They were not established to do all the operational things that now they're kind of doing. That's under COG purview. And the reason that matters is that means that our COG committee structure that we serve on has a say in those fees that are being set and cost recovery. If it's in the purview of the authority, we no longer have a say. So this proposed change is sort of, it has larger policy meaning than simply a text change. And I brought this up when this first came across our desk. So I think I'm going to probably separate it out as an agenda item and come back to it. But if you see in our code, even just to change letter D, it doesn't really make sense, because if you scroll up a wee bit more, in number 1 that introduces all of these things, we've already said that the department has that authority. So item 1 says, oh, the department, COG, Finance Committee, has the authority to do these things. And then in letter D, we've said, oh, the Recreation Authority has the authority to do these things. So even if we decided as a policy, hey, we're fine with the authority doing it, the proposed change would not look like this in our code. It would look different than this, because the Park and Recreation Department is not the same thing as the Park and Recreation Authority. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. And then really, the reason I included food trucks, that notation, so I'm going to switch to other attachment. The reason I included the food truck is we have in our township, our zoning administrator is responsible for zoning permits for food trucks. So in this 27-723C3, it states the Center Region Park and Recreation Authority is solely responsible for permitting and regulation of food trucks in public parks. So I wondered, how does that work with our zoning administrator being responsible for permitting, zoning permit wise, of food trucks, and the Center Region Park and Recreation Authority being solely responsible for food trucks in the park?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I don't think the issues come up a great deal because we don't commonly have food trucks in township parks. The zoning administrator would certainly be responsible for issuing a zoning permit for any food truck that were operating at any other establishment or any other property within the township. But if we had a food truck purveyor or owner who wanted to participate maybe in an event or something like that were, say, scheduled at TUDEC, otherwise they do no business in Ferguson Township, they don't stop at any other businesses, they don't stop at on any other days of the week to service any other sections of the township. I think in that application, it's conceivable that they would not need a zoning permit from the township unless, I don't know, Jenna, if you think, Jenna's.
Well, before Jenna weighs in, I'll weigh in on a non-park food truck permitting issue through zoning administration, which is I arranged for several food trucks to be at polling locations one year, and each of them had to have a zoning permit through our zoning administrator.
Right. I got Brazilian munchies at Videon.
If I, as a resident, wanted to have my kid's graduation party at a park, and I decided I wanted to outsource my cooking to a food truck, would I have to get permission from Center Region Park and Rec Authority, or would I be getting permission from our zoning administrator, or both?
Yeah, I mean, I think in that application, and again, I can only kind of give a hypothetical because at least to my knowledge, that hasn't came up. If it were a food truck, Jeff will issue, the zoning officer will issue a zoning permit for a food truck, or maybe more appropriately called a license, that'll apply for a period of 1 year. And in that year, that purveyor will need to tell the zoning administrator, okay, here are the locations that I'm proposed to be located at. If it were solely going to be a food truck that were operating at a park, no other places in the township, I can see, without consulting the zoning officer to determine how he would decide on that, I could see him saying, look, it's only in a park, it's out of the responsibility. You don't have to get a zoning permit. You still have to get permitting through the Department of Health, through the other, agencies that require it, but you may not need a zoning permit because you're not going to be frequent. You're not going to be going to any other property in the township other than that specific municipal park for one particular event. You have to, in that case, go through Center Region Park and Rec Authority, who is, according to the ordinance, the way it's written now, solely responsible for permitting and regulating food trucks in public parks.
Okay. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why that's the case. And I don't know if any board members have anything to say. Yeah, Lisa.
So I'm trying to work out those scenarios in my head too. So if there's a food truck that operates in the township and has a permit through zoning here, and then wants to cater that birthday party at a park also, they would then have to, on top of their township permit, go to Center Region Parks and Rec and get an additional permit.
That's correct.
And do we know about those fees or anything?
Not off the top of my head. In fact, I really can't think of an example, maybe some of the other staff on the call can, of where we've had food trucks in parks.
I think part of the,
I just
part
don't
of-
know that it's ever
yeah.
happened, at least in my tenure. I can't.
Well, I want to say, I think part of the reason for that, and here's like my larger goal here, is to open up the use of our parks in more ways that perhaps other agencies are not as open to. So I don't want to create barriers for our residents to use our parks in appropriate ways. And I think it would be different if this was a regional park that is managed by the Center Region Park and Recreation Authority. But these are our municipal parks. And I think, notifying perhaps, I don't know, the CRPR may or may not be necessary. But I don't understand why we would, after that food truck has gone through its Department of Health, after that resident has gotten whatever they need to have that food truck be on site from Ferguson Township, I don't see why we have to provide an additional barrier. I know that, for example, like if you are, say you want to take pictures, say you're an individual photographer and you would like to take pictures and use the park setting, Center Region Park and Rec will charge you for that. And yeah, and I don't know, this is where it comes to like setting fees for use of our own municipal park. So it is a deeper issue. That may or may not be appropriate. If you're like using an amenity and prohibiting others, maybe that's appropriate. Anyway, so this sort of opens a door into some other regulations, but I guess I would come back with a proposal that in our municipal parks, we don't need our food trucks to be permitted by Center Region Park and Recreation Authority. Does anybody have?
But I guess where I see that it might complicate.
There's Steve. Oh, you're muted again, Steve. You bumped the button.
I guess where I see it, looking at it the other way, is if somebody didn't have a zoning permit in the township, but there was an event that Parks and Rec was having and wanted to have food trucks there, they would have to then get a zoning permit, as well as if they wanted to do one-time thing in the township, they would have to get a zoning permit then. I'm not sure that's a problem, but I'm just saying, I don't know that changing it necessarily simplifies things, as opposed, and I think the question that you would get from Parks and Rec is, do we want to be essentially saying that anybody can operate a food truck in the park, and how does that interact with other events they have going on? If you can take a food truck, if you have a zoning permit, and take your food truck to the park anytime you want to, without checking with Parks and Rec.
Yes.
How does
Correct.
that, does that interfere with other things that may be going on there?
Yeah, the only modification I would make on that statement is it's not anytime you want to. It's you're still telling our administrator, our zoning administrator.
But if Jeff approves it, then
correct.
Independent of Parks and Rec, then you can,
Yes.
And that, I guess, I think that's the reason that it's written the way it is. Whether we want to change it or not is independent of that. But I think the reason is that, you've got other things going on in the park that Jeff may not be involved in.
Mm.
So I don't know. That's just another point on it.
Okay. All right. I'll think about that. Thanks.
Posing it, but
Thank you. Then there was one other item, and I would like to then close this conversation after I take any other board input, just because the hour is getting late. Recently, Center Region Park and Rec passed a rule for certain entities to store their belongings in our parks. And they didn't, so they charge, I think they charge a fee, but they didn't say, so there's been an issue with one third party storing their goals in a willy-nilly manner in one of our parks. So I've been working for a couple years now for them to not store the items in such a willy-nilly manner. So now Park and Recs has evolved a permitting system where they can store them, but they've allowed to store the goals within another amenity. So there's a bunch of soccer goals stored in our baseball diamond. And so I don't know about when sports conflict or don't conflict, but basically I'd like to request that if Park and Rec is going to allow for storage of third-party entity items in our own municipal parks without our permission, that they don't allow it to be done that takes up another amenity. And this is just sort of like, it shouldn't be that hard to have this conversation, but it is. So this has been a 3-year project, and I'm not even sure how to address it. So I'm going to put it out there on the table as just another item that we can think about in terms of our relationship and how we manifest that relationship through our rules, regulations, and code.
That's a good point. I haven't seen that, but I'm picturing if at Fairbrook, the soccer goals are stored on baseball field. I know a lot of people just go and use that, not as an organized game, but just for practice. So, and there would be a lot of other places to store that stuff. So it seems kind of an obvious thing to ask.
Yeah, it's been an ongoing issue. There's another place in our code that relates to sharing of amenities that's important. I wanted to point out, I don't see on my notes where I've written down where it appears, but I did want to bring it up while we have a moment to talk about this. It's about shared amenities. So we talk often about how important and expensive our parkland is, and that a soccer field becomes a sledding hill, becomes a this, becomes a that. That just because it has soccer goals doesn't mean it's only going to be a soccer field. I'll come back with a proposal and an identification of where this is in our code, but we explicitly say in our code that this is prohibited. If an area is supposed to be used for soccer, other activities are prohibited within that area. And that is not how we think about our parkland when we're designing our parks. So I'm gonna come back with a proposal that we modify or remove that. And we can think about that then. So any other questions, comments, concerns? I'll find, okay. And I appreciate all of your time, everybody, in thinking through some of these things. I think we're at the end of our agenda where we do reports, but I'm furiously scrolling there. Yes. So I'll close the discussion there and move on to staff and committee reports. And first we have COG committee reports and executive committee. Steve.
Yeah, those are just agendas from, or the agenda from last month. So there's really nothing
Thank you.
Other than we
Next
canceled
is-
the COG meeting, so.
Yeah, we're in a whole new year now. Lisa, next is Transportation and Land Use Committee.
Same, I think I already reported on the December meeting.
Okay, great. Then we have other committee reports, Climate Action and Adaptation Technical Advisory Committee. Dave, is that you?
Well, typically it would be. I didn't get a chance to attend this meeting. I try to when my schedule allows, but it didn't. I know that they're conceptually the intent for the technical advisory group would be to continue in their role. Much like the Metropolitan Planning Organization technical advisory group does, where you have a coordinating committee of elected officials. In this case, you'd have a climate action committee of elected officials, and then you'd have the tag that would continue to operate. So I think, in addition to talking about regional greenhouse gas initiatives, there's also a lot of organizational structure discussion that's happening amongst that group. Like I said, I wasn't able to attend the December 21st meeting, so I don't really have much to update on that. The agenda's in the packet.
Thanks, Dave. And then just for clarification, so what you're saying is right now, as our structures stand, we here in Ferguson Township have a climate action and adaptation technical advisory group. And then now at the COG level, we have a climate action and sustainability committee. And it's likely that that sustainability committee is going to evolve a plan, and that there will be a technical advisory committee to then help implement that plan.
Yes, that's my understanding. The only kind of slight amendment I would make to that summary is that while we do have a climate action committee locally for the township itself, they are not a standing committee. The intention is that once the strategy is developed to achieve the net zero greenhouse gas emissions goal that was set by the board in 2017, that unless there was a need for that committee to continue to serve, or unless it was formalized in more standing committee format, they would disappear. That would be the end of them. So it's kind of an ad hoc group at this point, but it is a local committee. And they've kind of evolved a little bit.
Could we possibly get a report from that committee?
It is in the works. Brandy Robinson, who chairs not only the township's climate action committee, but also the regional tag, is putting some finishing touches, on an inventory report and a general strategy. So there's a deliverable that they're finalizing right now. And at the conclusion of that, they're going to make a presentation to the board. This was hoped to have been done late last year, but through delays and everything, it got pushed a little bit. I expect it will either be February or at the very latest, early in March when we'll get that report.
Thank you. That'd be great. Thank you very much. And then we'll move right into staff reports. And Dave, you're up first.
Yeah, thank you. I don't really have I don't have a written report. Given the holidays, there wasn't a whole lot of activity going on. I was asked and accepted a request from the COG executive director to serve on the screening committee for the SCLO library executive director applicants. So in that capacity, myself, along with Tom Fontaine, representing the municipal managers, and a few other representatives from different stakeholder groups, will do the initial screening of applicants that will then be passed on to the steering committee, which I believe Ms. Danini sits on, and other elected officials and representatives from the SCLO Library Board of Trustees, where they'll ultimately make that final discussion or that final selection. So we have our first meeting scheduled for this Thursday. And, I'll continue to report as appropriate, back to the board with any updates from that. This week, I'm attending a hazard mitigation webinar that's been put on by Center County. And I anticipate that will largely just be, a continuing discussion of pandemic response initiatives and other efforts that we've had underway over the last several months. Meeting this week with the stormwater fee consultant, Elizabeth Treadway of Wood, as well as Dave Modricker and Ron Cyber, to begin to put the framework together for the meeting next Tuesday. That's January 12th. the stormwater fee special meeting work session. So I will circulate a draft agenda to board members just for your review and comment. If you have anything that you see that's missed on that, or that you'd like to see added, please let me know. Try to get that out by midweek this week to give you a few days to look it over and provide any revisions. But I want to get that up on the website this weekend so that folks have an opportunity to review it and decide whether they want to come and participate or sit in on the meeting. So look forward to that. And I believe that is all of substance that I wanted to report on, unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Dave? Lisa?
Find my mute button. I was going to ask under calendar items, but since you brought it up now, can we post something about that January 12th work session? Because I don't think I've gotten some emails from some people, and there doesn't seem to be awareness that that's coming up. So if we could get something out in advance of the agenda coming out, highlighting that meeting's occurring.
Yeah, we
had
will.
had-
Well, it is on the website, and it's under our calendar of events. And I believe Nick Figaro has done some other outreach, but Centrise, you can check in on that tomorrow. As soon as we have an agenda that's finalized, it'll go up on the webpage, and we'll make sure that that's visible and front and center.
And then that agenda will come out through constant contact, the folks that are on that list, like the Total Township newsletter list or something to this effect. Yes.
Yeah, I believe I don't know exactly which listserv, but we have a listserv that Nick maintains that it would get distributed through, as well as post.
Okay. And maybe we could tweet it and book it too, just so we are doing the maximum saturation.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I was already on the website. So I hadn't seen anything, and I'd gotten some comments about people just not having heard about it. So I wanted to mention it.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dave? Dave Prabalka, that is. Okay. Next, Public Works Director, Dave Modricker.
No written report. I will say that road crews and winter operations work on the Public Works building continues. Substantial completion is still the first week in February. So big push to get things, wrapped up here this month. A lot of interior work going on. The next big activity is the epoxy floor in the garage. Temporary heat's in place, waiting for the gas company to install a gas valve to get the gas turned on. There's been a couple of hiccups there, but they're getting worked out. Progress meetings continue, and then most engineering staff, arborists work in a combination of remote work and field work, mostly remote work.
Thanks for keeping those roads safe. Any questions for Dave Modricker?
I was talking to the road foreman on Sunday, and he said they've been called out twice now in the new year.
Oh, geez.
We're just not that
Not
far
good so
into the
far.
new year.
Yeah. Moving on then, Planning and Zoning Director, Jenna.
Yes, I don't have a written report either. From the 14th to now, I say most of planning and zoning staff has been on vacation. So we are pretty much using this time to catch up and get ready to start on some new projects in the new year.
Thank you. Any questions for Jenna? Okay, move on to communications to the board. Okay. And calendar items. Just to re-mention that work session for the stormwater fee is January 13th. Oh, am I saying the wrong number? 12?
Well,
January 12th, the 12th of January at 6 o'clock. Okay, January 12th at 6 o'clock, stormwater fee work session. Any other calendar items? Okay, we've reached the end. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good
Bye-bye.
night. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa, before you jump off, at some point, I'm gonna locate you for some signatures as vice chair.
See
And by
everybody.
a lot of
Bye.
signatures.
Lots and lots of signatures.
Great. I'm
Bye.
ready for it.
All right, good. Take care.
All right. Good night.
Good night.